Simulacra theory. Imagine walking through a theme park built to look like a small town. The streets are clean, the buildings charming, the smiles practiced. It feels real, at least at first glance. But it isn't a real town. It's a copy of an ideal that never truly existed. This is the starting point of John Baudrillard's simulacra theory, the idea that in the modern world, representations no longer reflect reality, instead they replace it. Baudrillard suggested that society has passed through different stages of how it deals with representations. First, representations reflected reality, like a portrait captures a face. Then they started to distort it, like propaganda twisting truth. Eventually, representations began to mask the absence of reality, pretending to reflect something that was no longer even there. And finally, the image became pure simulation, a self-contained reality that refers only to itself. At this stage, there is no real to compare it to. Think of brands selling authenticity, lifestyles manufactured for social media, or nostalgia for eras that never truly existed. Think of news cycles reporting narratives rather than facts, endlessly looping performances of truth. Think of celebrity personas so curated they have no center anymore, only layers. Baudrillard called this the hyper-real, a world of signs without originals, where what matters isn't what is, but what appears to be. In the hyper-real, Disneyland isn't just a theme park, it becomes more real than real towns. Reality TV isn't just entertainment, it shapes what people believe life should look like. Fast food chains aren't just selling burgers, they're selling symbols of Americana. And the more we consume these simulations, the harder it becomes to recognize them. The boundary between the real and the artificial blurs until we live inside the copy, forgetting there was ever something outside of it. This wasn't just a criticism of media, it was a warning about perception itself. If the map becomes more real than the territory, if the model becomes more real than the experience, then where does that leave us? Drifting inside a constructed world, exchanging symbols for meaning, appearances for substance. Baudrillard even extended this idea to power and politics, suggesting that elections, debates, and public narratives are performances of choice, not real expressions of power, that we consume democracy like a product, that dissent becomes just another marketed identity. And perhaps the most unsettling thought, once reality has been replaced by layers of simulation, there's no easy way back, even knowing the trick doesn't free you from it. You are still inside the theme park, walking streets that were built to be walked. Not because they reflect life, but because they were built to be walked. And if reality itself can fracture into endless reflections, what happens if every possible world, not just every possible image, is real? Because in the next reflection, imagination and existence become the same thing. Modal realism. Picture yourself standing on a quiet road, faced with a choice, left or right. You choose left, feeling the weight of decision, the reality of the moment. But what if choosing right was just as real as the road beneath your feet, as real as the breath in your lungs, only somewhere else? According to philosopher David Lewis and his theory of modal realism, that other path isn't just a possibility, it exists, literally. Modal realism proposes that every way a world could possibly be is a world, a full, complete, concrete world, not just a dream or a thought, but a universe as real and tangible as this one. Every choice you didn't make, every event that didn't happen, every dream unrealized, it's all real somewhere, unfolding with its own stars, histories, and souls. In Lewis's view, these other worlds aren't less real or imaginary. They simply aren't ours. They are isolated, separate realities, inaccessible to us, but no less genuine for their distance. When you imagine a version of yourself who chose a different career, moved to a different city, loved a different person, that version isn't just a shadow in your mind. It's a person, living a life, walking a different road. Modal realism stretches the very definition of reality. We often think of possibilities as fragile, delicate things, maybes, could-bes, easily crushed by the weight of what actually happens. But Lewis asked, what if possibility itself is a kind of existence? What if the vast sea of what might have been is just as deep, just as rich as what is? This idea challenges our deepest intuitions. It suggests that this universe isn't singular or special. It's one among an endless tapestry of worlds, stitched together not by space or time, but by the structure of possibility itself. It also reframes how we think about truth. When we say something could have been, we aren't just expressing regret or fantasy. We are gesturing toward a real place where that thing is. Every hypothetical carries the weight of existence. Of course, modal realism faces sharp criticism. Many philosophers find it too extravagant. Why multiply worlds when one seems hard enough to explain? But Lewis argued that accepting all possible worlds is simpler than trying to explain why possibility feels so real, if it's just illusion. And maybe, in a strange way, modal realism offers comfort. Somewhere, there's a world where you made the other choice, where the lost opportunity bloomed, where the different words were said. Every door you thought you closed forever opened somewhere else. But if every possible world is real, then what does that say about consciousness itself, about the spark inside every living thing? Because in the next reflection, reality isn't divided into many worlds. It's woven into every mind, every atom, every breath of being. Panpsychism. You place your hand on a stone, feeling its cool weight, its silent presence. To you, it is inert, dead matter, a thing. But what if that stone, mute, unmoving, had its own kind of awareness? This is the heart of panpsychism, the ancient and enduring idea that consciousness isn't unique to humans or animals or even life. It's a fundamental feature of the universe, woven into the very fabric of existence itself. According to panpsychism, everything has some form of subjective experience. Not consciousness as we know it, no plans, no language, no dreams, but some flicker of awareness, however faint. A grain of sand, a gust of wind, a distant star. Each, in some unfathomable way, feels its existence. This view challenges the dominant story of the modern age, that consciousness is an accident, a rare property of complex brains. Panpsychism suggests the opposite, that mind in some form was always there, that before there were creatures, there was still experience. Before thought, there was feeling. Before life, there was awareness. It doesn't mean that rocks think or that rivers plot their course. It means that at the most basic level, the level of particles, of fields, there is not just mass and charge, but subjectivity, that the building blocks of reality are not mute, but humming quietly with their own internal lives. This view has ancient roots. Philosophers like Thales, Anaximenes, and later Spinoza saw spirit and matter as inseparable. In more recent times, thinkers like Alfred North Whitehead and Galen Strawson have revived the idea, not as mysticism, but as a serious metaphysical theory. In fact, panpsychism offers a solution to one of philosophy's hardest puzzles, the hard problem of consciousness. How does matter produce mind? How does brain tissue, arranged just so, create the vivid world inside your head? Panpsychism suggests a radical answer. It doesn't. Mind was already there. Brains don't invent consciousness. They amplify and organize it. If this is true, then existence is richer than we imagined. The universe isn't a dead machine with a few sparks of life. It's a living web, every piece glimmering with its own faint light. And you, your thoughts, your feelings, aren't a freak anomaly. You are an intensification of a universal principle. It's a vision both humbling and haunting. Because if everything feels, however dimly, then every movement, every collision, every transformation carries an interior echo. Reality isn't just seen and touched. It's experienced. And if consciousness pervades the smallest parts of reality, what happens when reality itself becomes too vast, too tangled, too massive for any single mind to grasp? Because in the next reflection, we won't just find mind in the tiny, we'll confront realities so vast, so entangled, they warp thought itself. Hyperobjects. You stand in a field under a vast sky. The breeze shifts, the sun burns. Deep underground, oil seeps. Far overhead, satellites drift. All around you, forces move, too vast, too slow, too tangled for any one person to fully see. These are not things you can point to. Not simple objects. They are hyperobjects, entities so massive in time and space that they defy full human comprehension. Coined by philosopher Timothy Morton, the term hyperobject describes phenomena like global warming, nuclear radiation, deep time, and black holes. Things that are real, tangible, consequential, but so distributed across time and scale that they seem almost invisible. You can't walk around a hyperobject. You can't hold it in your hand. You experience only pieces of it, weather patterns, data points, rising tides, sudden storms, but the whole remains beyond your grasp. A hyperobject is sticky. It intrudes into your everyday life, whether you notice it or not. It haunts every decision you make, even if you pretend it isn't there. And crucially, it isn't somewhere else. It's everywhere, entwined with your body, your breath, your future. Hyperobjects stretch our imagination. They outlast us, outscale us, operate beyond our usual frameworks of cause and effect. Their presence forces a kind of philosophical vertigo, the feeling that you are inside something vast, relentless, and inescapable. Morton argued that hyperobjects change not just how we live, but how we think. They reveal the limits of individualism. They expose the fantasy that the world is small enough to manage with a few good ideas or a few small tweaks. You don't solve a hyperobject. You live with it. Global warming, for example, isn't a problem that can be fixed in a moment. It's a condition that humanity has entered, like stepping into an altered climate field that will last for tens of thousands of years. Every action, every inaction ripples within its vast web. Hyperobjects force us to rethink agency, responsibility, and scale. They make clear that some consequences are too big to undo. Some realities are too intertwined to isolate. Some futures are already written into the structure of the present. But there's a strange beauty, too, a recognition of entanglement, a humbling sense that the self is always part of something larger, something older, something quieter and more enduring. And if hyperobjects stretch our minds outward to the vastness of being, what happens when we turn inward and find that even the smallest particle carries within it a complete universe? Because in the next reflection, reality won't just be massive and tangled. It will be indivisible and infinitely deep. Monadology. Imagine a universe built not from atoms or strings or fields, but from pure, indivisible centers of being. This was the vision of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, one of philosophy's great architects of the invisible. In his Monadology, Leibniz proposed that the fundamental building blocks of reality are not physical particles, but monads, simple, soul-like entities that compose everything. Monads are not extended in space. They have no parts. They cannot be divided, broken, or touched. They are metaphysical points, each one a self-contained mirror of the entire universe. Every monad reflects the whole cosmos from its own unique perspective. Some monads are dim and barely aware, like the monad of a stone, sensing only the faintest echoes of existence. Others, like human souls, are luminous, capable of perception, memory, and thought. But all monads, from the simplest to the most complex, are expressions of a single harmonized reality. Leibniz imagined the universe as a vast symphony. Each monad plays its part, perfectly coordinated with all the others, not through direct interaction, but through pre-established harmony. Before time began, God set all monads in motion, synchronized like clocks built to keep perfect time without touching. This vision resolves many of philosophy's puzzles. If monads don't interact directly, there's no need to explain how mind and body communicate. If every monad contains a complete perspective, there's no need to posit a material world separate from consciousness. Reality becomes a grand unfolding of internal states, each monad tracing its path, each reflecting the evolving whole. It's a universe without randomness, without collision, without chaos. Every moment flows from a deeper order, written into the fabric of existence. But it's also a universe of radical intimacy. You are not a speck lost in infinite space. You are a window onto the entire cosmos. Everything you perceive, everything you feel, is your monad's unfolding vision of reality. And every other being, stone, tree, star, is doing the same, from their own unfathomable vantage point. Leibniz's monads remind us that the external world may not be as external as it seems, that reality's true substance might be interior, silent, indivisible. And if each being reflects the whole, what happens when we ask whether there are timeless realities beyond all reflection, perfect forms that all things imperfectly echo? Because in the next reflection, reality won't just be inside every mind. It will live beyond time itself, in a world more real than our own. The theory of forms. Picture a world where nothing fades, nothing decays, nothing slips through your fingers. A world where beauty isn't fleeting, but eternal. Where justice isn't debated, but simply is. Where every imperfect thing we encounter is just a shadow of something pure, waiting beyond the veil. This was the world Plato glimpsed, the world of forms. According to Plato, everything we experience in the physical world, every tree, every horse, every act of kindness, is a copy, an echo, a dim reflection of an ideal form. There is, somewhere beyond time and space, a perfect tree, a perfect horse, a perfect kindness, not physical things, but pure, changeless realities. In the realm of forms, triangles don't have crooked edges, circles aren't slightly wobbly, goodness isn't mixed with selfishness, courage isn't tainted by fear. Each form is what its name means, fully, perfectly, without compromise. Our world, the world we touch and taste and see, is a world of becoming, a place where things grow and die, change and corrode. But the world of forms is a world of being, a place where truths do not age and ideals do not falter. We recognize beauty because our souls, Plato suggested, dimly remember it. We know justice not because we've seen it in pure form here, but because we're haunted by a deeper memory of it. Like prisoners in a cave, seeing only flickering shadows on the wall, we long for the sunlight we barely recall. In this vision, philosophy becomes a kind of remembering, a turning of the soul back toward what it once knew but has forgotten. But Plato's theory of forms is more than metaphysics. It's a call to transcend the surface of things, to look past the temporary, the corrupted, the half-true, and seek what is timeless and whole. It's a reminder that the world we inhabit, the world of appearances, is not the final word. There is something higher, something more real, waiting to be glimpsed beyond the confusion of ordinary life. And yet, it's also a haunting thought. If everything we know is a shadow, how can we trust our senses? If all we see is imitation, what does it mean to know anything at all? Maybe reality isn't a fixed realm waiting above us. Maybe it's something that's always in motion, always unfolding, more like a river than a sculpture. Because in the next reflection, being itself won't be a destination. It will be a process, a dance that never ends. Process philosophy. Imagine standing by a river, watching its endless flow. You try to grasp the water, to hold on to a single moment, but the current slips through your fingers. The river isn't a collection of static things. It is movement, it is change, it is becoming. This is the spirit of process philosophy, a radical vision that claims reality is not made of fixed substances, but of processes, events, flows. Where traditional metaphysics sees the world as composed of stable entities, objects that persist through time, process philosophy, championed by thinkers like Alfred North Whitehead and Henry Bergson, argues that what truly exists is not things, but happenings. Everything is in motion. Everything is unfolding. A tree isn't just a tree. It's a growing, decaying, photosynthesizing event. A person isn't a fixed self, but a changing network of thoughts, memories, feelings, and decisions, weaving together moment by moment. Even the stones under your feet, seemingly still, are in slow, quiet flux. Atoms vibrate. Matter decays. Landscapes erode. Nothing is frozen. Nothing is final. In this view, stability is an illusion, a useful fiction the mind creates to navigate a world too fluid for easy understanding. We carve names onto moments, call a pattern a chair, a mountain, a city, but beneath the names, everything surges forward, restless, alive. Process philosophy challenges not just what we think reality is, but how we think about knowledge, identity, and value. If all is becoming, then truth is not a fixed point but a moving horizon. If all is becoming, then the self is not a noun but a verb, a continuous project of construction and renewal. It shifts ethics too. Instead of asking, what is the right rule? We might ask, what is the right unfolding? Instead of seeking timeless principles, we attend to evolving relationships. Instead of freezing the world into categories, we join its dance. And perhaps most profoundly, process philosophy redefines existence itself. To exist is not to occupy space. It is to happen. The universe is not a silent museum of objects. It is a symphony in motion, a storm of creation and decay, persistence and change, echoing across scales we can barely perceive. And if reality is always becoming, always flowing, then how do we think about our lives, our memories, our futures? Because in the next reflection, we won't just see time as a river we float through. We'll see ourselves as creatures stretched across its endless dimension. Four-dimensionalism. Picture a loaf of bread. Now imagine slicing it, each cut revealing a thin layer of what was always there. According to four-dimensionalism, your life, your whole existence, is like that loaf. Not just the person you are now, but every past version of you, every future version, all stacked together, forming a complete, unbroken entity stretched across time. In this view, time is not something you move through. You are a four-dimensional being, extended not just across space, but across time. The child you were is not gone. The elder you will become is not waiting to be created. Every stage, every moment, every breath you've taken or will take exists as part of the structure of who you are. You are not just a fleeting present. You are an elongated being, reaching from your first heartbeat to your final breath. And so is everything else. The mountain isn't just what you see now. It's the slow lift of tectonic plates, the endless erosion of wind and rain, the future collapse into dust. The mountain is a four-dimensional sculpture. Your dog isn't just the wagging tail today, but the awkward puppy from years ago, the wise old companion of years ahead. Every living thing, every object, every event is a worm stretched through the tapestry of space-time. We live with the illusion of the present because our minds are built that way, but reality, according to four-dimensionalism, doesn't slice itself into moments. Past, present, and future are all equally real. This view upends much of how we think about change, identity, and causality. You don't become over time. You simply are, a whole, extending through time as much as through height or width. Change is not a process of transformation. It's a difference from one temporal part to another, the way your head differs from your hands. It reframes morality too. Hurting a person isn't just causing pain now. It's altering the shape of their entire temporal existence. Helping someone isn't just a kindness in the moment. It's a thread woven into their eternal form. It's a perspective both thrilling and unsettling. Because if all times are equally real, the moments you regret, the moments you cherish, they all still exist, just slices along the span of your being. And if you are a being of temporal parts, composed of many different selves across time, what does it mean to say you are one? Because in the next reflection, identity itself will fragment, not across space, but across every moment you have ever lived. Temporal parts theory. Picture a train stretching endlessly across a vast landscape. Each car holds a different scene: a birthday, a heartbreak, a quiet morning, a final goodbye. You, the traveler, move through these cars one at a time, believing each to be the whole journey. But what if you weren't the traveler at all? What if you were the entire train, the whole sequence, from first car to last, all at once? This is the heart of temporal parts theory. The idea that we are not single, unified beings persisting through time, but rather collections of temporal parts, momentary slices of existence, stitched together into the illusion of continuity. You are not one enduring self. You are a series of selves, each tied to a specific moment, each slightly different, each existing fully in its own time. The you who first learned to walk is not merely a memory. It is a different part of the being you call yourself. The you listening now is another, and the you yet to come, the one who will look back on this day, is yet another. None is more real than the others. None holds exclusive rights to your identity. According to this view, persistence through time is not about one entity enduring unchanged. It's about a sequence of temporal parts, related in certain ways, through memory, intention, causality, but distinct nonetheless. Temporal parts theory reframes everything. When we say a river flows, we know the water is always different. The river remains, but only because of the relations between its parts. So it is with you. The feeling of being a single self is like the river's name, a convenient label for something fundamentally dynamic. This vision can be unsettling. If every you is just a momentary slice, who are you really? Which part is the true you? The child full of wonder? The adult full of questions? The future self you have yet to meet? Maybe identity is less like a statue carved in stone, and more like a melody. No single note defines it, yet the sequence gives it shape. Maybe to be human is not to be one thing over time, but to be many things, woven together by memory, desire, and imagination. And if reality is composed of countless selves unfolding through time, what happens when we ask whether time, space, and even the objects we experience are simply constructions of the mind itself? Because in the next reflection, existence won't just be stitched together from parts. It will be reframed entirely from the inside out. Transcendental idealism. Imagine waking from a dream and realizing that every wall, every voice, every law of physics you took for granted had been shaped not by an external world, but by the structure of your mind. Immanuel Kant's transcendental idealism is not about denying the existence of reality. It is about realizing that what we experience as reality is inescapably a construction filtered, shaped, and bounded by the architecture of human perception. We do not see the world as it is. We see the world as it appears to creatures like us. According to Kant, there is a world in itself, the nominal world, but it is forever beyond our direct grasp. What we experience is the phenomenal world, the world as it appears through the lens of human cognition. Space and time, Kant argued, are not properties of the external world. They are forms of human intuition. They are the conditions under which we can experience anything at all. Similarly, concepts like causality, substance, and necessity are not drawn from experience. They are imposed upon it. Our minds are not blank slates, passively recording impressions. They are active weavers, stitching together sensations into a coherent tapestry according to deep, invisible rules. This insight shatters the traditional model of knowledge. Before Kant, philosophers often assumed that the mind conforms to the world. Kant inverted the idea: the world as we experience it conforms to the mind. We never encounter the thing in itself. We encounter only appearances ordered by the innate structures of human thought. Yet Kant was no skeptic. He believed that science, morality, and reason still have validity within the phenomenal realm. His philosophy is not a rejection of truth, but a reframing of what truth means for beings like us. It demands humility. The laws of physics may describe the universe as we know it, but they are silent about what lies beyond the filters of space and time. Ethics may reveal deep obligations, but they unfold within a framework we did not choose. Every experience you have, every sunset, every song, every sorrow is shaped not just by the world, but by the lens through which you meet it. And if reality, as we know it, is a co-creation of mind and matter, then philosophy becomes less about uncovering a hidden real world and more about understanding the conditions that make experience possible at all. It's a vision that leaves reality partly known, partly mysterious, a dance between what is given and what is made. But what happens when we go even further? When we attempt to set aside even the structures Kant describes, to bracket the world entirely and look inward toward the pure experience of consciousness itself. Because in the next reflection, reality won't just be filtered by the mind. It will be suspended, leaving only the raw unfolding of awareness. Phenomenological reduction. Imagine standing in front of a grand cathedral. You see the soaring arches, the intricate stained glass, the stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Your mind leaps to assumptions, history, craftsmanship, meaning. But what if you could peel all that away? Not just the stories, but even the belief that the cathedral is there in some absolute sense. What remains? Edmund Husserl, the father of phenomenology, sought to answer this question through a method he called phenomenological reduction. It is a radical act of bracketing, a suspension of judgment, not about particular claims, but about the very existence of the external world. Husserl asked us to set aside, temporarily, the assumption that the world exists independently of our perception, not to deny it, but to withhold judgment, to place it in parentheses. What matters is not whether the cathedral really exists. What matters is the experience of it, the way it appears to consciousness. This method peels back the layers of habit, expectation, and interpretation. It invites us to return to the things themselves, to experience phenomena purely as they are given, before we impose categories, theories, or metaphysical claims. It is a journey to the bedrock of awareness. When you bracket the belief in the external world, what remains is not nothing. It is the rich, immediate flow of experience, the colors, the textures, the feelings, the sense of space and time. Consciousness reveals itself not as a mirror passively reflecting a world, but as an active field in which phenomena unfold. Phenomenological reduction shows that every experience is shaped by intentionality, the directedness of consciousness towards something. You do not simply see, you see something as something. A pattern as a window, a sound as music, a gesture as kindness. This directedness is not added later. It is the basic structure of experience. And when you reduce the world to pure phenomena, the boundary between subject and object begins to blur. Experience is not divided into inner and outer. It is a unified field where meaning arises, where the world is co-created moment by moment. Husserl's project was not to destroy reality, but to uncover the conditions that make reality intelligible. To show that beneath our assumptions and beliefs lies a more fundamental layer, a world of appearances so immediate, so intimate, that we often overlook it entirely. Phenomenological reduction is both terrifying and liberating. It strips away the scaffolding we lean on to feel certain. It demands that we dwell with the rawness of perception. But in doing so, it opens the possibility of a more honest encounter with reality, not as something out there, but as something alive within consciousness itself. And if experience at its core is so immediate, so self-given, how should we treat what simply appears to us as real? Because in the next reflection, we will explore the idea that what seems true to us at first glance is often a trustworthy guide, even when the world offers no proof. Phenomenal conservatism. You open your eyes to a morning sky, soft light filtering through shifting clouds. You feel certain the sky is there. You don't question it. You don't demand proof. Your experience itself seems to justify your belief. This quiet trust in appearances lies at the heart of phenomenal conservatism, a theory proposed by philosopher Michael Huemer. According to phenomenal conservatism, if something seems true to you, if you have a clear, immediate seeming that this is so, then you are justified in believing it, unless you have a good reason to doubt it. Seemings are the starting point of knowledge. When you see a tree, hear a melody, feel the warmth of another hand, you don't need to construct elaborate arguments to justify the belief that these things are real. The experience itself carries its own authority. This is not a call for blind faith. Huemer acknowledges that seeming can be mistaken. Hallucinations, illusions, and dreams can fool us. But the burden is on the doubt, not on the seeming. Unless we have positive reasons to distrust an experience, we are entitled to trust it. Phenomenal conservatism stands against the endless regress of radical skepticism, the demand that every belief be justified by another belief, which must itself be justified, and so on forever. It offers a simple foundation: belief is justified when it arises from a seeming, unless defeated by contrary evidence. This view reshapes epistemology, the study of knowledge. It tells us that certainty is not the default. Trust is. We do not build our beliefs brick by brick on perfect foundations. We navigate the world by trust in how things appear, correcting course only when experience or reflection forces us to. It also honors the ordinary. You don't need philosophical training to know the ground is beneath your feet. You don't need a proof to know you are feeling sorrow or joy. The world meets you through your senses, your emotions, your intuitions, and that meeting has weight. Phenomenal conservatism restores dignity to everyday experience. It suggests that knowledge is not a fortress for the elite, but a garden anyone can tend, rooted in the simple fact that things seem a certain way. But this view carries a deeper challenge too. Because if we trust seemings unless we have a reason not to, then we must also listen to the seemings of others, their lived realities, their perceptions, their truths, and sometimes seemings collide. Navigating those collisions requires humility, openness, and care. Phenomenal conservatism doesn't give us certainty. It gives us a starting point, a way to begin thinking, believing, and knowing without falling into paralyzing doubt. And if knowledge begins with the way the world seems, what happens when our very minds extend beyond the boundaries of skull and skin? Because in the next reflection, we'll explore a vision of mind that doesn't end where the body does, but flows outward into tools, spaces, and other minds. Extended mind hypothesis. You scribble a note on a scrap of paper, tuck it into your pocket, and walk away. Hours later, you pull it out, and there it is. A memory preserved outside your brain, ready to re-enter your mind. Was that scrap of paper merely a tool? Or was it, in some real sense, part of your thinking? This question lies at the heart of the extended mind hypothesis, a bold idea proposed by philosophers Andy Clark and David Chalmers. They suggest that the mind is not confined within the boundaries of the skull. It spills outward into notebooks, smartphones, calculators, even conversations with others. The boundaries of cognition are porous. Tools and environments we interact with become literal extensions of our mental processes. Think of how you use your phone to remember birthdays, find your way, calculate, store ideas. The phone isn't just assisting your mind, it's becoming part of it. Or consider language itself. When you formulate a thought, often it's not fully real until you speak or write it. The act of externalizing words helps structure and clarify what you feel. In this view, speaking isn't an expression of preformed thought, it's part of thinking itself. The extended mind hypothesis reframes intelligence. It's not solely a function of what's inside the brain, but how the brain interacts with its environment. A mind doesn't just think inside, it loops through the world, pulling in artifacts, symbols, gestures, relationships. You are already, without realizing it, a cyborg, a hybrid creature, your consciousness interwoven with paper, pixels, people. This view challenges deep intuitions about the self. If my diary stores part of my memory, what happens if it's lost? Have I lost part of my mind? If two people constantly collaborate, finishing each other's sentences, extending each other's ideas, are they, in some sense, one larger cognitive system? The extended mind also has profound implications for ethics, education, and technology. If cognition is distributed, then access to tools and environments becomes a moral issue. Inequality in information technology isn't just a convenience gap, it's a cognitive gap. Those with richer cognitive scaffolding literally have more powerful minds. And as we build more immersive tools, AI companions, neural interfaces, augmented reality, we are not just building gadgets. We are reshaping what minds are. The boundary between self and world becomes thinner, blurrier, more entangled. But if the mind extends outward into the environment, what happens when the environment itself is shaped not by a shared reality, but by the subjective construction of each individual? Because in the next reflection, reality itself won't just be extended. It will be something each mind actively builds piece by piece, story by story. Radical constructivism. You open your eyes and see a world, colors, shapes, faces, trees, skies. It feels immediate, solid, objective. But what if that world is not something you discover? What if it's something you construct? Radical constructivism, championed by thinkers like Ernst von Glasersfeld and John Piaget, suggests that knowledge is not a mirror of an external reality. It is a tool we build, piece by piece, experience by experience, to navigate and survive. Reality in this view is not something we find out there, ready-made and waiting. It is something we assemble inside ourselves, based on our senses, our needs, our histories. Knowledge is like a spider's web, spun from within, anchored wherever it can catch hold. When you learn something new, you are not uncovering a hidden structure. You are weaving another thread into your own evolving world. This does not mean there is no external world, but it means that our access to it is always mediated, shaped by our biology, our language, our culture, and our prior constructions. We are not passive recipients of truth. We are active builders of meaning. In radical constructivism, truth is not correspondence with an objective world. Truth is viability. A belief is true if it helps us function, adapt, predict, survive. If it fits into the web without tearing it apart, if it helps us move through life more effectively. This view radically shifts how we think about knowledge, education, and even communication. Education, from this perspective, is not the transfer of facts from one mind to another. It is the nurturing of construction, the guiding of learners as they build their own worlds. It is about coordinating constructions, finding enough overlap between two subjective worlds that understanding becomes possible. Communication is not about transmitting a fixed meaning, and disagreement is not necessarily a clash over what is. It may simply be the collision of two differently constructed realities. Radical constructivism invites humility. It reminds us that certainty is rare, that our models of the world are always provisional, always incomplete. It suggests that we must remain open to reconstruction, to revising the very frameworks through which we perceive. It challenges the arrogance of believing we see the world as it is. It invites us to recognize that we see the world as it appears to us, and that appearance is a living creation. But this raises unsettling questions too. If knowledge is a construction, if truth is viability, if reality is always partly made, how do we ever escape solipsism? How do we know that we share a world at all? Maybe after all the arguments and constructions, the wisest course is not to declare what reality is, but to remain silent. Because in the next reflection, philosophy will not build new systems. It will rest in the stillness of what cannot and need not be said. Quietism. You climb a mountain seeking answers about life, about truth, about the hidden architecture of reality. You struggle upward through storms of doubt, scaling cliffs of complexity. You reach the summit, expecting a grand revelation. But when you arrive, you find only silence. This is the spirit of Quietism, the philosophical view that many of the great questions that torment us are not to be answered, but dissolved. That philosophy's highest achievement is not the construction of grand systems, but the quieting of the mind. Quietists argue that much of philosophy's confusion comes from misuse of language, trying to talk about things that cannot meaningfully be talked about, asking questions that rest on false assumptions. When we realize this, they suggest the compulsion to answer such questions fades. Thinkers like Ludwig Wittgenstein in his later work, and philosophers of the ordinary language tradition gesture toward this view. Philosophy, they say, is not a ladder to ultimate knowledge. It is a therapy for conceptual confusion. We do not solve philosophical problems. We outgrow them. Quietism invites us to recognize that some puzzles arise not from the world's complexity, but from the way we frame our inquiries. Like chasing the horizon, the more urgently we pursue certain questions, the more they recede. Questions like, what is the real self beneath all roles and masks? What is the true meaning of life, apart from all human interpretations? What is the absolute foundation of knowledge? Quietism suggests that these questions may not have answers because they were never properly formed to begin with. They are illusions spun by language, by misunderstanding, by the yearning for certainty where none can be found. But this is not cynicism. It is a gentle letting go. The point of philosophy in this view is not to build new castles in the air, but to dismantle the ones that trap us. To free ourselves from compulsions to solve the unsolvable, to return to the ordinary, to the lived experience of breathing, seeing, speaking, without needing to anchor it in ultimate theories. Quietism reframes intellectual humility. It's not resignation, it's liberation, a recognition that sometimes peace comes not from knowing more, but from wanting to know less. It invites a kind of philosophical silence, not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of understanding the limits of understanding. Yet even within this quiet, the old questions still flicker. Because human minds are restless. And the next ancient debate waits just beyond the stillness, a battle over whether the things we name are real in themselves, or only in our words. In the next reflection, reality will fragment once again as we explore whether universals exist beyond language or whether they are merely convenient fictions of the mind. Nominalism versus realism. You look out at the world and see 1,000 different things: trees, rivers, birds, mountains. You give them names, categories, concepts. You call it nature, beauty, life. But what are you really naming? Are you identifying real structures woven into the fabric of existence, or are you simply projecting patterns onto chaos, carving meaning into an indifferent world? This is the ancient debate between nominalism and realism, one of the oldest and deepest battles in philosophy. Realists believe that universals, categories like tree, justice, circle, exist independently of our minds. When you see two different trees and call them both tree, you are recognizing a real shared essence. The category is not just a convenience, it's a reflection of something objective. For realists, language uncovers a deeper order. Concepts point beyond themselves, toward structures that exist whether or not we name them. Nominalists, by contrast, argue that universals are inventions. Useful, yes. Necessary, perhaps, but not real in themselves. There is no treeness floating somewhere behind each oak and pine. There are only individual objects, and we lump them together because it suits our purposes. Under nominalism, language does not reveal hidden realities. It organizes experience. Calling a group of creatures birds does not uncover a secret property they all share. It simplifies our interactions with a messy world. It helps us communicate, predict, survive, but it doesn't mirror some deeper metaphysical truth. This debate has consequences far beyond abstract metaphysics. In science, realism supports the idea that categories like electron or species correspond to real divisions in nature. Nominalism reminds us that our classifications might just be convenient fictions, subject to revision. In ethics, realists argue that virtues like justice or goodness have real existence beyond human opinion. Nominalists see moral values as human constructs, powerful, binding, but ultimately artifacts of culture and language. Even in politics, the tension plays out. Are rights and laws rooted in some objective moral order, or are they agreements we make, useful but contingent? Nominalism fosters humility, and sometimes skepticism. Realism fosters reverence, and sometimes rigidity. Both remind us that the act of naming is powerful, that in labeling the world, we are not merely describing it, we are shaping it. Perhaps there is no final answer. Perhaps the world is both an intricate structure beyond us and a tangled web we spin to survive. But if reality itself might fracture under our gaze, sometimes one, sometimes many, what happens when we dare to imagine that there is not one reality, but many kinds of being, many modes of existence, layered and interwoven? Because in the next reflection, the very idea of what exists will no longer be a single question. It will become a chorus of different answers, singing at once. Ontological pluralism. Imagine stepping into a library where every room follows different rules. In one room, objects are solid, tangible, defined by their mass and motion. In another, relationships define reality. Nothing exists except in how it connects to something else. In yet another room, numbers and concepts have as much reality as rocks and rivers. This is the world of ontological pluralism, the view that there is not just one kind of existence, but many. According to ontological pluralists, being is not a single, monolithic property. Existence comes in different modes, different textures, different intensities. A person exists differently than a number. A fictional character exists differently than a planet. A dream exists differently than a mountain. Each mode of existence is real, but real in its own way. In this view, asking, does X exist, is incomplete. We must also ask, in what way does X exist? Ontological pluralism resists the flattening of reality into a single dimension. It honors the richness and variety of how things are. Take numbers, for example. Are numbers real, like chairs and trees? They don't occupy space, they don't weigh anything, yet they are indispensable for understanding the physical world. In ontological pluralism, numbers exist, but in the mode appropriate to abstract entities. Or consider fictional characters. Sherlock Holmes does not exist in the way London does, but within the realm of literature, within the world of collective imagination, Holmes has a kind of real presence. He shapes culture, inspires thought, lingers in memory. Ontological pluralism asks us to think carefully about context. An electron and a legal right both exist, but not in the same way. One has mass and charge. The other has force within a system of human agreements and institutions. This view challenges deep habits of thought. We often seek one master map of reality, one way of saying what really exists. Ontological pluralism suggests that reality is not one map but many overlapping landscapes, each with its own rules, its own criteria, its own kind of truth. It invites humility. When we encounter something unfamiliar, a culture, a belief system, a work of art, a mathematical proof, ontological pluralism reminds us that it may not make sense on our terms. It may play by different existential rules, and that difference does not make it less real. Ontological pluralism also opens space for wonder. The world becomes richer, more layered, more mysterious. Being itself is no longer a single note, but a symphony. But if reality can be plural, if existence wears different faces, then what happens when even our basic concepts of object, boundary, and truth shift depending on the language and framework we use? Because in the next reflection, reality won't just have multiple kinds. It will change shape depending on how we choose to describe it. Conceptual relativity. You walk into a room and see a chair. Simple, right? A single object, resting solidly in space. But depending on how you describe it, reality itself begins to shift. Is the chair a collection of atoms arranged chairwise? A social artifact defined by human purposes? A bundle of sensory impressions, shape, texture, balance, woven together by your mind? Hilary Putnam's conceptual relativity challenges the idea that there is one privileged way to carve the world into pieces. Instead, it suggests that multiple conceptual frameworks can be equally valid, and that what exists can depend on the framework we adopt. Reality is not a single grid laid over experience. It is a shifting map, its lines drawn differently depending on how we choose to think. Consider the classic example Putnam offers, a table. From one conceptual scheme, it's a single object. From another, it's a swarm of particles loosely bound by forces. From yet another, it's a human-made tool with cultural meaning. None of these views is simply wrong. Each captures different aspects of the table's being. Each organizes experience in ways that serve different purposes: scientific, practical, aesthetic. Conceptual relativity suggests that disputes over what really exists often arise not because one side is correct and the other mistaken, but because they are operating within different conceptual schemes. Language doesn't merely describe the world. It helps shape the structure we perceive. This view reshapes our understanding of truth, objectivity, and knowledge. It doesn't mean anything goes. Conceptual schemes can be more or less coherent, more or less useful, more or less attuned to patterns in experience. But there is no single absolute vocabulary privileged to reveal the way things truly are. Instead, reality meets us through many lenses, many grids, many forms of description. Conceptual relativity invites tolerance for philosophical diversity. Different cultures, different disciplines, different eras may slice reality differently, and not simply because of ignorance or error. Sometimes, reality allows multiple, overlapping, equally legitimate ways of being seen. It also invites a kind of philosophical humility. The concepts we inherit, object, cause, number, self, are not transparent windows onto the real. They are tools, evolved for particular needs. They can be refined, reshaped, even replaced. And that reshaping reshapes the world we live in. Because in the end, the world we navigate is not simply given. It is partly built by the hands of culture, language, imagination. But if truth itself can shift depending on conceptual frameworks, what happens when we ask whether truth is even one thing? Because in the next reflection, truth will no longer be a single shining light. It will become a constellation, many lights, many paths, many ways of being right. Alethic pluralism. You hear a claim, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. It sounds true. You hear another, kindness is better than cruelty. That too feels true. But are they true in the same way? Alethic pluralism, the philosophy of truth, proposed by thinkers like Crispin Wright and Michael Lynch, suggests that truth is not a single, uniform property. Instead, truth manifests differently in different domains of thought. Truth is plural. In some areas, like mathematics and the natural sciences, truth may be about correspondence, statements matching an objective reality. 2 plus 2 equals 4, because that is how quantities relate. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius under standard pressure because that's a fact about the world. But in ethics, aesthetics, law, and human emotions, truth might work differently. It might be about coherence within a system of values, or about what would survive ideal reflection among reasonable people, or about what best fits human needs and flourishing. Alethic pluralism holds that these different kinds of truth are not inferior or confused. They are simply different. Truth is not one size fits all. It bends, adapts, and reshapes itself depending on the kind of thing we are trying to describe, understand, or judge. This view challenges two extremes. Against radical relativism, alethic pluralism insists that truth is real, that it matters whether claims are true or false. But against rigid monism, it denies that there is only one correct model of truth applicable everywhere. Instead, it invites a layered understanding. It asks us to recognize that the world of physics, the world of morality, and the world of art are not stitched from the same cloth, and that the ways we judge truth must be sensitive to those differences. Alethic pluralism offers a bridge between science and humanity. It honors the rigor of empirical investigation without dismissing the profound truths found in stories, in songs, in ethical commitments. It suggests that truth is not an object we find lying in the dirt, but a dynamic relation between thought and world, adapted to different terrains. But alethic pluralism also carries a quiet warning. If truth comes in different forms, then defending truth becomes more complicated. We cannot simply demand the facts in every domain. We must understand the standards appropriate to each field of thought and learn to navigate between them with care. Truth remains our guide. But it is a constellation, not a lighthouse. And if truth itself can be plural, unfolding differently across the vast fields of knowledge, what happens when even logic, the bedrock of reasoning, turns out not to be one single infallible system, but many possible paths? Because in the next reflection, reasoning itself will fracture into multiple forms, each with its own rules, its own insights, its own way of navigating the infinite complexities of thought. Logical pluralism. In one version, every move follows strict rules, no contradictions, no ambiguities, everything black or white. In another version, the rules shift depending on the context. What is valid here might not be valid there. You sit down to solve a puzzle. Welcome to the world of logical pluralism, the idea that there is not one true logic, but many. Traditionally, we think of logic as singular and absolute. The laws of thought, the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, the law of excluded middle, seem to define the structure of rationality itself. Logic is supposed to be the iron skeleton behind all correct reasoning. But logical pluralists challenge this vision. They argue that different kinds of logic are appropriate in different contexts, and that no single logic can claim absolute supremacy across all domains. Sometimes classical logic serves perfectly. In mathematics, in formal proofs, in the construction of airtight arguments, classical rules shine. But other times, when dealing with vague concepts, paradoxes, conflicting information, other systems, like intuitionistic logic or relevance logic, offer better tools. Logical pluralism holds that these different systems are not rivals fighting for dominance. They are tools in a wider toolkit. The validity of a logical system depends on the standards appropriate to the kind of reasoning being done. Imagine logic not as a monolithic castle towering above all thought, but as a vibrant marketplace, many systems, many paths, each suited to different terrains. This view reshapes how we think about reasoning itself. It invites us to be flexible, to match our methods to our materials, to recognize that human thought is too rich, too varied, too context-sensitive to be captured by a single rigid framework. Logical pluralism doesn't reject rigor. It redefines it. Rigor means using the right tools for the right job, not forcing every problem into the same mold. This has profound implications for philosophy, mathematics, computer science, even everyday argument. It challenges the arrogance of believing that one logical method can answer all questions. It fosters a kind of epistemic humility, a recognition that thought itself is more diverse, more layered, more adaptable than any single system can encompass. Yet this flexibility comes with a cost. When multiple logics are available, disagreements about reasoning itself become harder to settle. What counts as a valid argument depends on what logic you are using. But perhaps that's not a flaw. Perhaps it's a reflection of the complexity of the world and of ourselves. Because if logic itself can branch into many forms, what happens when we dare to build logics that not only differ in method, but tolerate contradictions themselves? Because in the next reflection, we will step beyond the borders of classical thought into a landscape where contradiction does not spell disaster, but opens new pathways of understanding. Paraconsistent logic. Imagine standing at a crossroads where two signs point in opposite directions, and both are correct. In classical logic, this would be an impossible scene. Contradictions are fatal. From a single contradiction, traditional logic warns, anything and everything can follow. If a statement and its negation are both true, then reason collapses into chaos. But paraconsistent logic dares to ask, what if contradiction does not have to mean collapse? Paraconsistent systems of logic are designed to tolerate inconsistencies without exploding into absurdity. In these systems, it's possible for a contradiction to exist without allowing every conclusion to become trivially true. In classical logic, the principle of explosion says that from a contradiction, any statement can be proven. If A and not A are both true, then the moon is made of cheese also becomes true, simply because the system has been broken. Paraconsistent logicians reject this. They build logics that can register a contradiction without surrendering all structure, all meaning. Think of a legal system where two laws conflict, and yet society continues. Think of a person who holds conflicting emotions, love and resentment, and yet remains coherent. Life itself often tolerates contradictions better than classical logic does. Paraconsistent logic models this resilience. It provides a framework where contradictions can be localized, managed, and reasoned about without infecting the entire system. This view challenges deep-seated intuitions about rationality. It suggests that coherence is not the same as consistency, that understanding can survive, even thrive, amidst pockets of paradox. Paraconsistent logic has profound implications. In computer science, it allows databases to handle contradictory information without crashing. In legal theory, it models systems where different principles conflict without necessitating revolution. In philosophy, it opens the door to rethinking the structure of argument and belief. More than anything, it reflects a mature understanding of complexity. The world is messy. Knowledge is incomplete. Beliefs clash. Feelings contradict. Systems evolve under pressure, demanding perfect consistency from human life, or from reason itself, may be a beautiful dream, but it is not always a faithful portrait of reality. Paraconsistent logic is not an invitation to embrace contradiction blindly. It is an invitation to acknowledge that contradiction can exist without annihilating thought. It asks us to rethink the role of logic, not as a tyrant imposing rigid order, but as a guide navigating the rough waters of complexity. But if even logic, the most sacred of structures, can be reimagined, what happens when we question the very foundation on which knowledge claims are built? Because in the next reflection, we'll confront a seductive but dangerous idea, the belief that some truths are simply given to us, pure and unmediated, an idea that may turn out to be one of philosophy's greatest myths. The myth of the given. You open your eyes and see a red apple. It feels immediate, pure, like the mind receiving a raw fact from the world. Surely, you think, some knowledge comes to us directly, without interpretation, without judgment. But Wilfrid Sellars warned, this is an illusion, a comforting story, a myth. He called it the myth of the given, the belief that there is a foundational layer of knowledge made of pure, uninterpreted facts simply given to the mind. Sellars argued that all perception, all experience, is already shaped by concepts, language, and background understanding. There are no pure data points waiting to be absorbed. Even the most basic experiences are filtered, organized, and framed by the mind's prior structures. When you see an apple, you are not just receiving red and roundness and smoothness. You are recognizing appleness. You are fitting sensations into a vast web of meaning you have learned over time. Experience is never raw. It is always cooked, always mediated by thought. The myth of the given is seductive because it promises certainty. If we could find pure givens, we could build knowledge like a pyramid, layer upon unshakable layer. But if Sellars is right, there are no foundations outside interpretation. Knowledge is not a tower rising from a bedrock of self-evident facts. It is a dynamic, evolving system of beliefs, constantly cross-checking and revising itself. In Sellars' vision, even simple seeing is a sophisticated achievement. To see an object as red, or as an apple, or even as something there presupposes a whole framework of conceptual abilities. This insight reshapes how we think about science, philosophy, and human understanding. Science is not a pure recording of observations. It is an intricate dance between theory and measurement, concept and data. Philosophy is not the uncovering of naked truths, but the refining of conceptual frameworks to better navigate experience. Even everyday life is a tapestry woven from interpretations, expectations, memories, language games we hardly notice ourselves playing. Sellars didn't deny that experience is real. He denied that experience gives us a shortcut around thinking. Knowledge, in his view, is holistic. It is a web, not a chain. Beliefs support each other, challenge each other, evolve together. No belief stands alone, justified by some mythic given. This vision demands intellectual humility. It reminds us that certainty is fragile, that every claim rests within a larger, fallible context. It urges us to stay vigilant, to remain open to revising even our most basic assumptions. But if even our most immediate experiences are saturated with interpretation, what happens when we question the very existence of the concepts we use to describe ourselves? Belief, desire, intention, feeling? Because in the next reflection, we will confront a radical proposal that many of the familiar categories of the mind may not exist at all, that they are relics of a folk psychology we are destined to leave behind. Eliminative Materialism. You wake in the morning with a thought, I want coffee. It feels natural to describe this inner state, to talk about beliefs, desires, feelings, as if they are real, substantial parts of the mind's machinery. But what if they aren't real at all? What if belief and desire are like ancient concepts of phlogiston or ether, useful fictions that science will one day discard? This is the unsettling vision of eliminative materialism, championed by philosophers like Paul and Patricia Churchland. Eliminative materialists argue that our everyday understanding of the mind, what philosophers call folk psychology, is a deeply flawed theory. We talk about intentions, beliefs, hopes, fears, as if they were basic components of mental life. But in truth, they say, these concepts are imprecise, outdated, and destined for replacement by a more rigorous neuroscience. In the future, they imagine, we will not say, I believe it will rain. We will describe neural patterns, brain states, information flows without needing the clumsy metaphors of belief or desire at all. Our common sense picture of the mind, in this view, is a relic, a convenient but inaccurate model, much like how ancient civilizations explained lightning through the anger of gods. This is not just a minor adjustment. It is a revolutionary overthrow of how we think about ourselves. Eliminative materialism challenges the very language we use to describe experience. It suggests that we are on the brink of a scientific revolution in understanding consciousness, one that will render many familiar concepts obsolete. This view is radical and deeply controversial. Critics argue that eliminative materialism cuts too deeply, denying the reality of phenomena we directly experience. Surely, they say, feeling sad or hopeful is real, even if the underlying mechanisms are complex. Defenders reply that history is filled with painful corrections. People once knew that the sun revolved around the earth. They knew disease was caused by bad air. Science often forces us to abandon intuitive models in favor of stranger, deeper truths. In the same way, eliminative materialists believe we may have to abandon much of our mental vocabulary, not because our feelings are unreal, but because the concepts we use to explain them are fundamentally flawed. It's a vision that demands profound humility and a willingness to see ourselves not as narrators of our inner life, but as biological systems with complex mechanistic inner workings. It invites a future where psychology and neuroscience fuse, leaving behind folk narratives for a stark, elegant description of the mind's architecture. But if we are ready to rethink the very categories we use to describe ourselves, what happens when we also realize that interpreting minds, including our own, is itself a stance, a strategy, a useful fiction we apply to make sense of behavior? Because in the next reflection, we'll explore the idea that understanding minds is less about uncovering hidden truths and more about adopting the right perspective. Intentional stance. You watch a chess player leaning over the board, brow furrowed. You don't think of her as a mere collection of atoms shifting in a field of forces. You think she wants to win. She believes moving her knight will trap the king. Without even realizing it, you slip into the intentional stance. Philosopher Daniel Dennett introduced this idea to explain how we predict and understand complex systems, especially minds. The intentional stance is the strategy of interpreting an entity's behavior by treating it as if it has beliefs, desires, and intentions. It's a stance, not a discovery of some hidden machinery, but a way of looking that makes prediction and understanding possible. When we treat someone or something as an agent with goals and information, we can anticipate its actions without needing to model every internal detail. You use the intentional stance when you talk to a friend, teach a child, or even play chess against a computer. It is not limited to humans. We adopt the intentional stance toward animals, robots, corporations, even nations. We say, the company wants to expand into new markets, as if a legal entity could harbor desires. This view reshapes how we think about minds. Minds are not necessarily deep, mysterious substances hidden inside bodies. Sometimes they are patterns we project onto behavior, because doing so is useful. Dennett described 3 ways we understand things. First, by the physical stance, looking at behavior through the lens of physical laws, like gravity and chemistry. Second, by the design stance, thinking in terms of function, like trusting that a toaster will heat bread because that's what it's built to do. And third, by the intentional stance, seeing actions as driven by beliefs, desires, and goals, even when those mental states are assumptions, not certainties. The intentional stance is powerful because it allows for simplicity in a chaotic world. Instead of tracking 1 billion neurons, you assume your friend believes the coffee is on the counter and desires to drink it. That assumption guides your understanding, and usually it works. Importantly, Dennett argues that adopting the intentional stance doesn't require metaphysical commitment. You don't have to believe that beliefs and desires are spooky inner objects. You only need to recognize that treating systems as if they have intentions helps you navigate their behavior. In this sense, minds are not just biological facts. They are patterns of interpretation, ways of organizing complexity. This perspective blurs the line between reality and useful fiction. Maybe consciousness itself, or at least our understanding of it, is less about uncovering hidden essences and more about adopting the most fruitful perspective. And if taking a stance is often more practical than finding ultimate truth, what happens when we extend that strategy to the deepest realms of human thought, mathematics, morality, even meaning itself? Because in the next reflection, we'll explore a philosophy that treats some of our most sacred concepts not as eternal truths, but as elegant fictions we live by. Fictionalism. You walk through an ancient city. The streets wind between towering statues of gods long forgotten. Once people lived and died for these deities. Once they shaped their entire lives around stories that no longer claim belief. But the stories still echo. This is the spirit of fictionalism, a philosophy that suggests some of our most important concepts are not descriptions of reality, but useful fictions we live by. In mathematics, fictionalists argue that numbers, sets, and functions do not exist as independent objects floating somewhere beyond the physical world. Rather, mathematical statements are like stories, immensely useful, internally consistent, and incredibly powerful for navigating reality, but not true in the way that mountains and rivers are true. When you say, "There is a prime number between 10 and 20, you are not discovering a hidden feature of the cosmos. You are participating in a grand, shared construction, a system of thought built for prediction, calculation, and structure. Similarly, in morality, some fictionalists argue that ideas like justice, goodness, or rights are not woven into the fabric of the universe. They are powerful inventions, stories we tell to coordinate behavior, to build communities, to express human aspirations. Without these fictions, society might unravel, yet they need not be objectively real to be binding and meaningful. Fictionalism challenges deep instincts. We long for certainty. We want to believe that numbers exist in some perfect, timeless realm, that moral truths are written into the stars. Fictionalism whispers that perhaps these longings are dreams, beautiful, necessary dreams, but dreams nonetheless. This view does not dismiss the importance of these domains. Mathematics remains astonishingly effective. Morality remains essential for human life. But fictionalism reframes their status. They are not mirrors reflecting a deeper reality. They are tools, maps, songs, creations that guide and structure our shared existence. The power of fictionalism lies in its honesty. It frees us from chasing metaphysical ghosts, from demanding that everything meaningful must be metaphysically grounded. It invites us to celebrate the creativity of human thought, our ability to spin vast, intricate webs of meaning from the loom of imagination. It also demands humility. If morality is a fiction, it must be constantly renewed, adapted, defended, not because it rests on cosmic law, but because it rests on human needs and dreams. If mathematics is a fiction, it must be judged not by its metaphysical purity, but by its coherence, utility, and beauty. Fictionalism teaches us that sometimes truth is less important than meaning. But if meaning arises from the stories we tell, what happens when we turn to the very substance of things and find that reality itself might be a marriage, not of story and mind, but of form and matter, locked together in every breath and stone? Because in the next reflection, we will step back to one of the oldest visions of being, a vision where everything is shaped not by chance or dream, but by the union of form and substance. Hylomorphism. You pick up a simple clay cup. You feel its cool texture, its rounded form, its fragile weight in your hand. It seems obvious, a thing, a whole, something complete. But Aristotle would urge you to look closer. To him, the cup is not simply a thing. It is the union of two principles, form and matter, woven together into being. This is the heart of hylomorphism, Aristotle's ancient yet enduring vision of reality. Hyl means matter, the raw stuff, the potential, the shapeless clay. Morphe means form, the structure, the organization, the pattern that makes a lump of clay into a cup, a seed into a tree, a cell into a living being. In Aristotle's view, everything physical is composed of these two aspects. Matter provides the possibility, Form provides the actuality. Matter without form is pure potential, undefined, unshaped. Form without matter is an abstract blueprint, an idea without flesh. Only together do they create the things of the world. Hylomorphism bridges two extremes. Against pure materialism, Aristotle insists that matter alone, without form, is not enough to explain the richness of the world. Raw atoms swirling in a void do not account for the intricate organization of life, mind, and purpose. Against pure idealism, he insists that form alone, without matter, is not enough either. Ideas need a medium. Structures must be embodied. Form and matter are inseparable, two sides of the same coin. When you look at a tree, you see not just wood and sap, but the organization of trunk, branch, leaf, a living structure unfolding through time. When you watch a musician play, you see not just fingers and strings, but the form of a melody embodied in sound. Hylomorphism also reshapes how we think about change. Change for Aristotle is the actualization of potential, matter taking on new forms. A block of marble becomes a statue, a child becomes an adult, a seed becomes a towering oak. Change is not the emergence of something from nothing. It is the unfolding of what was already latent, guided by form. Even the soul, in Aristotle's vision, is the form of the living body, not a ghost trapped in flesh, but the organizing principle that makes a body alive rather than inert. Hylomorphism offers a vision of the world that is deeply dynamic. Reality is not a frozen collection of objects. It is a ceaseless interplay of potential and actualization, of raw material taking shape, of form breathing life into matter. It invites us to see the world, not just as what is, but as what could be. Every piece of clay, every fallen seed, every unfinished thought holds a hidden form, waiting to emerge. But if Aristotle sought harmony between matter and form, what happens when we question whether any such stable structures exist at all? Because in the next reflection, we will step into a world where meaning unravels, where structures deconstruct themselves, and where certainty dissolves into endless play. Deconstruction. You walk into a grand library. The books stretch to the ceiling, each one promising knowledge, structure, meaning. You open a volume, expecting clarity. But as you read, something strange happens. Words point to other words, meanings slip and slide, certainty dissolves into endless interpretation. This is the experience of deconstruction, a philosophy most closely associated with Jacques Derrida. Deconstruction is not about destroying meaning. It is about uncovering the fragility of meaning, showing how every structure we build with language is shot through with tensions, contradictions, and ambiguities. Derrida challenged the old dream of philosophy, the dream that language could perfectly capture reality, that concepts could cleanly mirror the world, that truth could be nailed down with precision. Instead, he showed that every act of meaning, every attempt to define, to categorize, to fix, relies on oppositions, gaps, and assumptions it cannot fully justify. Language is not a transparent window onto the real. It is a hall of mirrors. Take a simple word like justice. What does it mean? Its meaning is shaped by what it is not, by injustice, by fairness, by mercy, by law. Its definition depends on other words, which themselves depend on yet other words. Meaning slips from word to word in an endless chain, never settling, never complete. Derrida called this the play of language. Not play as triviality, but play as movement, as the endless deferral of final meaning. Deconstruction is a method, a way of reading texts, institutions, even ideas that reveals how they are built on unstable ground. It is a philosophy of suspicion, of close attention, of recognizing the fissures beneath the surface. But deconstruction is not nihilism. It does not deny that meaning exists. It denies that meaning can ever be fully secured. It urges us to live with openness, to recognize that certainty is always partial, that structures always carry the seeds of their own unraveling. Deconstruction reveals the beauty and the peril of human thought. Our concepts aspire to clarity, but they are haunted by ambiguity. Our truths aspire to permanence, but they are woven from contingency. Even identity, the idea that I am me, is not simple or self-contained. It depends on what I am not, on memories, on expectations, on language I did not invent. Deconstruction teaches patience. It invites us to listen to texts, to traditions, to each other, not as bearers of final answers, but as living fields of meaning, open to reinterpretation, and it invites humility. If every meaning is haunted by its own instability, then we must approach truth with gentleness, with a willingness to revise, to reread, to begin again. But if meaning slips through language, what happens when we turn to the deepest questions of all, questions about the divine, the absolute, the infinite, and find that words fail entirely? Because in the next reflection, we will step into a tradition that seeks to know by unknowing, to speak by unspeaking, to find truth, not in definition but in silence. Apophatic theology. You walk into a vast, silent cathedral. Candles flicker. Shadows stretch along stone walls. Above you, the ceiling vanishes into darkness. You try to name what you feel, awe, reverence, fear, but the words fall short. Sometimes what matters most cannot be spoken. This is the path of apophatic theology, the way of negation, the ancient tradition that seeks to approach the divine not by describing what it is, but by understanding what it is not. At the heart of apophatic thought lies a simple, humbling idea, ultimate reality, God, the absolute, whatever name we dare give, is beyond the reach of human concepts. Language born from finite experience can only mislead when aimed at the infinite. We say, God is powerful, God is wise, God is love. But every attribute, every word, limits as much as it reveals. Power, as we understand it, is shaped by force, by limitation. Wisdom is tied to ignorance overcome. Love is bounded by human frailty. To project these onto the infinite is to reduce it, to cage it in the symbols of human limitation. So the apophatic path strips language away. It does not declare what the divine is. It declares what the divine is not. God is not material. God is not finite. God is not changeable. God is not captured by form, by time, by place, by thought. Through each act of negation, the seeker is invited deeper into mystery, a mystery not dark because it is empty, but because it is full beyond comprehension. In Christian tradition, figures like Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite shaped apophatic theology, drawing from even older currents in Neoplatonism and Eastern thought. In other traditions, Islamic Sufism, Jewish Kabbalah, Hindu Advaita, similar echoes emerge, the sense that the highest truths cannot be spoken, only approached in silence. This approach does not reject reason. It transcends reason. It acknowledges that thought is a ladder, necessary, beautiful, but ultimately abandoned when we reach a certain height. Apophatic theology invites a different kind of knowing. Not a knowing that seizes and categorizes, but a knowing that surrenders. A knowledge born from unknowing, from awe, from reverent silence. It suggests that the ultimate is not a proposition to be affirmed, but a mystery to be inhabited. In apophatic prayer and meditation, words fall away, images dissolve. The seeker moves beyond doctrine, beyond certainty, beyond even belief, into a naked encounter with that which cannot be named. This path is not easy. It demands humility, the acceptance that even our finest concepts crumble before the weight of the real. But it offers a strange freedom. In silence, in negation, we glimpse a presence too vast for words, too intimate for definition. And if the highest truths are known through negation, through what we cannot say, cannot grasp, what happens when we turn this principle toward ethics itself? Because in the next reflection, we'll explore a philosophy that seeks not to maximize happiness, but to minimize suffering, a somber, radical vision of what it means to do good in a fragile world. Negative utilitarianism. Imagine walking through a field of wild flowers. The sun warms your skin, the breeze stirs the grass, laughter echoes in the distance. It is a scene of joy, of flourishing. Now imagine a different field, one scorched by fire, broken by drought, haunted by suffering, which demands your attention more urgently. For negative utilitarianism, the answer is clear. It is suffering, not happiness, that cries out most fiercely. Negative utilitarianism is a branch of moral philosophy that reorients the traditional utilitarian focus. Instead of aiming to maximize happiness, it prioritizes the minimization of suffering. Founded on the insight that suffering carries a moral urgency, unlike any other experience, negative utilitarianism holds that our first and foremost duty is to alleviate pain, prevent harm, and reduce anguish wherever it appears. Happiness is good, but the alleviation of suffering is morally mandatory. In classical utilitarianism, happiness and suffering are treated as moral equals, two sides of the same coin to be weighed and balanced. Negative utilitarians argue that this balance misses a crucial asymmetry. The badness of suffering outweighs the goodness of happiness. A moment of excruciating pain cannot simply be offset by a moment of mild pleasure elsewhere. The moral gravity of suffering pulls harder. This view reshapes how we think about ethics, policy, even existence itself. If our goal is to minimize suffering, then certain actions, even drastic ones, might be justified in ways classical utilitarianism would hesitate to endorse. It might be better to prevent the existence of beings destined for suffering than to gamble on the creation of happy lives that also risk deep pain. Negative utilitarianism also demands that we widen our moral attention. It calls us to notice the quiet, hidden, forgotten forms of suffering in distant lands, in silent minds, in future generations. It reminds us that much of the world's pain is invisible to those who are comfortable. Critics of negative utilitarianism argue that it leads to bleak conclusions, even in some formulations to the idea that the elimination of all life would be preferable to a world filled with inevitable suffering. Defenders reply that the purpose is not to court despair, but to heighten sensitivity, to sharpen the moral eye, to understand that the cries of the suffering carry a moral weight no amount of happiness can cancel out. Negative utilitarianism urges a deeper compassion. It asks us to see that preventing agony, healing wounds, comforting the broken, these are not optional projects. They are the core of moral life. And it challenges the shallow optimism that sometimes masks itself as ethical thought. Suffering is not an acceptable cost for the flourishing of others. It is a wound in the moral fabric that demands tending. But if the prevention of suffering takes precedence over all else, what happens when we ask the most unsettling question of all, whether it would have been better never to have been born at all? Because in the next reflection, we will confront a philosophy that dares to declare existence itself a burden too heavy to bear. Antinatalism. You stand at the threshold of life, peering inward. You see moments of joy, a child's laughter, a first kiss, a shared meal. But woven through the fabric of life, you also see the inevitability of pain, grief, sickness, loneliness, fear. Antinatalism dares to ask, is the gift of life really a gift at all? At its core, antinatalism is the philosophical view that bringing new life into existence is morally problematic, that it is better, all things considered, never to have been born. This is not a hatred of life. It is a deep compassion for the suffering life inevitably entails. Philosophers like David Benatar have shaped modern antinatalism with arguments rooted in an unsettling asymmetry. He suggests that the absence of pain is good, even if no one experiences that good, while the absence of pleasure is not bad unless there is someone deprived of it. In other words, if a person is never born, they miss out on pleasures, but they also avoid pains. And while missing pleasures is not inherently tragic, if there is no one to suffer the loss, avoiding suffering is always a moral good. Thus, not bringing someone into existence prevents harms without depriving anyone of goods. This view invites a radical reconsideration of existence itself. We are accustomed to thinking of life as a blessing, a miracle, a good to be preserved and propagated. Antinatalism forces us to confront the costs hidden within that assumption, the silent, unnoticed agonies borne by countless beings. No life is free from suffering. Every child born inherits not only the possibility of joy, but the certainty of loss, of pain, of death. Antinatalism doesn't deny that life contains beauty. It questions whether the price of that beauty, paid in inevitable suffering, is morally justifiable. Critics argue that antinatalism is too pessimistic, that it fails to honor the resilience, creativity, and meaning that life can hold. Some say that life's hardships are redeemed by its triumphs, its loves, its discoveries. But antinatalists respond with a sobering reminder. Triumphs do not erase suffering, they merely accompany it. And for many, the scales never tip toward joy. At its most haunting, antinatalism suggests that existence itself, the very act of being, is a wound. That the universe, in giving rise to sentient beings, has sewn pain into the fabric of reality. This view is not a call to despair, but to mercy. A mercy that dares to ask whether creating new life is an act of kindness or of cruelty. And it asks whether the deepest compassion might sometimes be restraint, the refusal to create a being who will inevitably suffer. But if antinatalism questions the value of bringing new life into existence, what happens when we take one step further, when we ask whether anything needs to exist at all? Because in the next reflection, we will step into the chilling possibility that nothingness, not being, might be the ultimate inevitable truth. Metaphysical Nihilism. You sit alone in a quiet room, feeling the walls, the chair, the steady pulse of your own existence. It all seems undeniable. This being, this presence, this something. But metaphysical nihilism dares to whisper a different thought. Perhaps there could have been nothing. At its heart, metaphysical nihilism is the idea that it is possible, logically, metaphysically possible, for there to have been no things at all, no stars, no atoms, no minds, no matter, not an empty universe, no universe, not a barren wasteland, no wasteland, not even a void, no space, no time, no anything. Absolute nothingness. This notion is not merely the absence of particular things, it is the absence of everything. Philosophers like Thomas Baldwin have explored this chilling idea through thought experiments like the subtraction argument. Imagine you could subtract one object from existence, then another and another, until with no logical contradiction, nothing remains. If such a total subtraction is possible, then being itself is not necessary. Existence, all of it, could have failed to happen. This view destabilizes our most basic intuitions. We often take existence for granted, as the default, the unshakable bedrock. But metaphysical nihilism suggests that existence is a contingent fact, not something inevitable, not something that had to be. Why is there something rather than nothing? Metaphysical nihilism does not answer this ancient question. It sharpens it, showing that nothing is not just an absence to be filled, but a genuine possibility that haunts being itself. The implications are profound. If existence is contingent, if the universe could easily have been nothing, then being itself is a fragile, mysterious phenomenon. Every moment, every breath, every heartbeat hangs over the abyss of nothingness. It invites awe. The simple fact that anything exists, this stone, this hand, this thought, becomes an astonishing, almost miraculous event. But it also invites humility, the recognition that existence is not owed, not necessary, not guaranteed. And it invites a sobering kind of gratitude, not for what existence contains, but for the bare fact that there is anything at all. Metaphysical nihilism is not despair. It is a confrontation with the raw contingency of being. It strips away our illusions of necessity, of permanence, of cosmic entitlement. But if existence is this fragile, this contingent, what kind of meaning or significance can it have? Because in the next reflection, we will step even further into the void, into a universe vast, ancient, indifferent, a universe that neither notices nor mourns our passing. Cosmic indifference. You stand beneath a night sky. Stars shimmer like frozen sparks across an endless black ocean. Galaxies wheel silently beyond sight. Light from dying stars travels millions of years just to brush your skin for a moment and then vanish. You feel small. You feel something deeper than smallness. You feel the vast, silent indifference of the cosmos. Cosmic indifference is the recognition that the universe is not a story about us. It is not a narrative built for human flourishing, for justice, for meaning. It is matter and energy unfolding according to blind, uncaring laws. Stars are born and die without celebration. Galaxies collide without intention. Species emerge and vanish without purpose. Human life, brief, fragile, self-aware, arises not by cosmic decree, but by chance. Evolution, natural selection, geological accident, an intricate chain of coincidences sculpting beings who dream of significance. But the universe does not dream. The Earth could vanish tomorrow, swallowed by fire or ice, and the galaxies would continue their slow dance, untouched, unknowing. Cosmic indifference is not cynicism. It is not a claim that nothing matters to us. It is a claim that nothing matters to the universe. The universe offers no guarantees. No rewards for virtue, no punishments for cruelty, no final justice written in the stars. It simply is. This realization can be shattering. It strips away comforting illusions, the belief that suffering must be redeemed, that goodness must triumph, that somewhere, somehow, meaning is guaranteed. But it can also be liberating. If the universe is indifferent, then meaning is not something we discover. It is something we create. In a cosmos that does not care, every act of kindness, every pursuit of truth, every moment of beauty becomes our defiance, our artistry, our fragile beacon against the dark. Cosmic indifference invites both despair and awe. Despair, because we are so small, so transient, so forgotten. Awe, because against all odds we are here thinking, loving, questioning, in a universe that neither planned for us nor notices our flame. It is a call to live without illusions, to embrace existence not because it fulfills some cosmic plan, but because existence itself, fleeting, improbable, precious, is all we have. It is an invitation to courage, because if the universe is indifferent, then our love, our laughter, our reaching hands, these small trembling gestures are not less meaningful. They are more. But how do we live fully aware of this indifference? How do we build lives of passion, of hope, of rebellion, in a world without guarantees? Because in the next reflection, we will walk alongside a philosopher who faced the silence of the cosmos and answered not with despair, but with a fierce, defiant embrace of the absurd. Absurdism. You open your eyes to a world that promises meaning. You see the structures we build, nations, traditions, dreams, all straining to stitch order onto the fabric of existence. Yet when you peer beneath the surface, you find a universe cold, silent, indifferent to human hopes. This is the tension Albert Camus called the absurd. Absurdism begins with the clash between two forces, the human need for clarity, purpose, and meaning, and the unresponsiveness of the universe to those needs. We search for answers. We cry out for justice, for permanence, for reasons, but the universe, vast, ancient, mechanical, answers only with silence. Camus did not see the absurd as a problem to be solved. He saw it as a condition to be faced, without illusions, without escape. Religions offer comfort by promising another world where meaning is secured. Philosophical systems offer intricate maps to explain away the void. Even suicide, Camus argued, is an attempt to escape the confrontation. But true absurdism refuses all these exits. It demands that we stand our ground, that we live in full awareness of the absurd, without fleeing into false hopes. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus offers his iconic image. Sisyphus, condemned by the gods, must roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time he nears the top. A meaningless task. A cruel sentence. And yet Camus insists we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Because the absurd hero does not surrender, he embraces his fate. In the very act of pushing the boulder, knowing its futility, Sisyphus defies the gods. He asserts his freedom. He creates meaning not from the universe, but from his own rebellion. Absurdism calls us to a life of revolt, a quiet, steady refusal to yield to despair or false consolation. It calls us to live with passion, with creativity, with full consciousness, not because life is destined to matter, but because it is ours. Love becomes more poignant, art more daring, laughter more profound, when we recognize that they arise in the face of indifference. Absurdism is not nihilism. It does not say that nothing matters. It says that meaning is not given, and that precisely because of this, the meanings we create shimmer all the more brightly against the vast dark. It is a philosophy of courage. To live absurdly is to embrace uncertainty, to walk forward knowing that the ground beneath you is not solid, but to walk forward anyway. But if absurdism teaches us to find dignity in our personal rebellion, what happens when we widen the lens, when we consider not just our individual lives, but the fragile survival of humanity itself? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a philosophy that stares into the future's darkest possibilities, a philosophy that asks how we bear the responsibility of a world balanced on the edge of annihilation. Existential risk philosophy. You stand at the edge of a vast canyon. The winds howl. Far below, rivers carve ancient scars into stone. You feel the dizzying scale of time, of danger, of fragility. Now imagine humanity itself standing at such an edge, not over a river, but over the possibility of extinction. Existential risk philosophy, shaped profoundly by thinkers like Nick Bostrom, asks us to confront the most profound dangers facing human civilization. Not ordinary disasters, not earthquakes, not wars, but events that could irreversibly end or cripple humanity's long-term potential. An existential risk is one where the stakes are ultimate. Not mere suffering, not mere loss, the complete destruction of humanity, or the permanent curtailing of its possibilities. Nuclear war, engineered pandemics, runaway artificial intelligence, uncontrolled climate collapse. These are not just future threats. They are knife edges along which we walk, often blindfolded by short-term concerns. Bostrom's philosophy urges a shift in perspective. But the life of humanity, the future of all generations yet unborn, matters on a scale almost beyond comprehension. The life of a single person matters. A single extinction event would not merely end the hopes and dreams of billions living today. It would erase trillions upon trillions of potential lives, cultures, discoveries, beauties that could have flourished across millennia. Thus, preventing existential risks becomes a moral priority of unparalleled weight. The mathematics is stark. Even a tiny increase in the chance of human survival ripples outward into vast, incalculable value. Existential risk philosophy challenges our instincts. Humans evolved to think locally, to protect their tribe, their town, their immediate future. But now, for the first time, we possess powers, technological, political, ecological, that could destroy our species entirely. Our moral horizons must expand. Bostrom argues that the greatest tragedy would not merely be death, but the loss of all future human flourishing, the countless symphonies not composed, the philosophies not dreamed, the friendships never born. Existential risk demands humility. We must recognize that we are children playing with forces we scarcely understand, forces that could shape or shatter the destiny of consciousness in the universe. And it demands imagination. Because some risks, such as misaligned AI or unknown biotechnologies, have no historical precedent, they require us to foresee dangers we have never faced before. Existential risk philosophy is not about fear. It is about stewardship. It calls us to protect not just what we have, but what humanity could become. It calls us to build bridges over the canyon, not just for ourselves, but for the unimaginable richness of the future. Because in the next reflection, we will turn our gaze outward to a hypothesis that suggests life might be far older, far stranger, and far more widespread than we ever dared imagine. But if humanity's destiny is this fragile, if consciousness itself teeters on a knife's edge, then how did life begin at all? Panspermia Hypothesis. You tilt your head back and stare into the vastness of space. Above you stretch billions of stars, each one a distant sun. Planets swirl unseen around them. Comets drift on ancient paths. Asteroids tumble through the black. In this cosmic dance, a question stirs. Where did life begin? The Panspermia hypothesis offers a daring answer. Maybe not here. Panspermia suggests that life did not originate on Earth. Instead, it proposes that life, or at least its basic building blocks, was carried here from elsewhere in the cosmos. Maybe it arrived on a comet, frozen in the deep cold of space. Maybe it hitched a ride on a meteorite, surviving the fiery plunge through Earth's newborn atmosphere. Maybe tiny organisms floated across interstellar distances, dormant for eons, until chance and gravity planted them in fertile soil. Under panspermia, Earth is not the cradle of life. It is merely one of countless gardens where life has taken root. This idea challenges deep assumptions. We often imagine life as a local phenomenon, a miracle of Earth's oceans, skies, and soils. But if panspermia is true, then life is not the universe's exception. It may be its natural expression. Life could be scattered across the cosmos, like seeds on the wind. Microbial fossils found in meteorites, the resilience of extremophiles, organisms that survive boiling heat, freezing cold, crushing pressure, and the discovery of organic molecules in deep space all hint at the plausibility of panspermia. Even now, space probes risk carrying Earth bacteria into the solar system, unintentionally continuing the ancient process. But panspermia does not solve the mystery of life's origin. It pushes it further back. If life came from elsewhere, then where did it first arise? On a distant planet? In the icy moons of a giant world? In the dark oceans of a rogue world adrift between stars? Or, more tantalizingly, did life emerge multiple times independently across the universe? Panspermia invites a profound reimagining of our place in the cosmos. If life is common, if the seeds of biology float between worlds, then we are not an isolated miracle. We are part of a cosmic lineage, a vast, ancient story written across galaxies, but it also humbles us. If life is seeded everywhere, then Earth is not special, not the unique center of a grand design, but one page among trillions. The panspermia hypothesis stirs both wonder and unease. It paints a universe teeming with hidden gardens, some blooming, some barren, connected by the invisible threads of drifting life. And it reminds us that the quest to understand existence is not bound by our homeworld soil. It is a journey outward, across the dark seas of space. But if even the origins of life escape clear answers, if we cannot even say with certainty where we come from, what does that reveal about the very nature of knowledge itself? Because in the next reflection, we will grapple with a philosophical problem that cuts to the root of certainty, a dilemma that asks how we can ever know anything when we cannot even agree on where to begin. The problem of the criterion. You find yourself in a dark forest. Paths stretch in every direction, but you have no map, no compass, no guiding stars. How do you choose a way forward? And how do you know if the path you choose will lead you out or deeper into the woods? This is the essence of the problem of the criterion, one of the most fundamental puzzles in epistemology, the study of knowledge. It asks two seemingly simple questions. First, what do we know? Second, how do we know? But here's the trap. To answer the first question, you need a method, a criterion for deciding what counts as knowledge. And to choose the right method, you would need to already know something about what knowledge is. Each question depends on the other. You cannot answer one without assuming an answer to the other. The philosopher Sextus Empiricus in ancient times, and later thinkers like Roderick Chisholm in the 20th century, brought this paradox to vivid life. Suppose you claim, I know the Earth orbits the Sun. How do you know? Because of scientific evidence. But how do you know scientific evidence is a trustworthy method? Because it has worked in the past. But how do you know what worked means without already trusting evidence? You are caught in a loop. One way out is to simply assume a method, to pick a standard and build knowledge from there. But this risks dogmatism, choosing without justification. Another way is to try to list some things you know intuitively and then infer a method from them. But this risks begging the question, trusting your examples before you've justified your trust. Some thinkers propose particularism, starting with what seems obvious and then working outward. Others propose methodism, starting with a method and filtering claims through it. Each approach carries dangers. The problem of the criterion suggests that the search for knowledge may be less a climb up a sturdy ladder and more a circular dance, each step depending on another, no clear beginning, no final end. It invites humility. It reminds us that certainty is rare and that every claim to knowledge rests on layers of trust, tradition, intuition, and method that we can question, but perhaps never fully ground. It also invites perseverance, because while perfect foundations may be unattainable, we still reason, inquire, explore. We still move forward in the dark, step by cautious step. The problem of the criterion does not paralyze thought. It sharpens it. It reminds us that every act of knowing carries risk, the risk of error, the risk of false certainty, and that recognizing this risk is the beginning of wisdom. But if every method, every belief demands justification, and each justification demands another, what happens when this need spirals endlessly, with no ground to stand on at all? Because in the next reflection, we will plunge deeper into the vertigo of philosophy, facing the ancient and haunting specter of infinite regress. Infinite regress problem. You reach for a truth, any truth. It slips through your fingers. You chase after a justification for that truth, a reason to trust it. Then you realize that justification itself needs a justification, and so does the next, and the next. This is the infinite regress problem. It is a specter that haunts philosophy, a relentless question mark hanging over all human knowledge. If every belief requires a reason, and every reason requires another reason, where does it ever end? Imagine building a tower. Each brick rests on another. Each layer must be supported. But if there is no foundation, if the bricks stretch downward forever, then the whole structure wobbles, unsecured, adrift. Infinite regress arises in countless domains, in epistemology, in ethics, in metaphysics. Suppose you claim, I know this is true. Someone asks, why? You offer a reason. They ask, and why is that reason trustworthy? You give another reason. And why that? Soon you are caught in an endless spiral, each answer birthing another question. Philosophers have proposed three main responses to this dilemma. First, foundationalism. The idea that there are basic beliefs, self-evident, indubitable, or directly experienced, that do not require further justification. Second, coherentism, the idea that beliefs are justified not by resting on unshakable foundations, but by fitting into a web of mutually supportive ideas like a ship afloat, each plank holding up the others. Third, infinitism, The bold claim that justification is an infinite chain, that knowledge never needs a stopping point, just an unbroken, ever-deepening sequence. Each approach wrestles with the abyss. Foundationalism risks dogmatism. How do we know these foundations are truly secure? Coherentism risks circularity. If beliefs support each other, does that mean they just spin in a closed circle? Infinitism, while elegant, feels impossible. Can any finite mind truly navigate an endless chain of reasons? The infinite regress problem forces us to confront the fragility of knowing. It reveals that certainty is not a fortress, but a fragile bridge over endless depths. Yet it also invites a kind of intellectual courage. To know, perhaps, is not to find final ground, but to stand skillfully on shifting sands, to weave structures of thought sturdy enough for life, even if they cannot be built to the stars. The infinite regress problem humbles us. It reminds us that every answer, every argument, every worldview rests atop choices, intuitions, and judgments that we can trace back, but never fully exhaust. It invites us to seek depth without demanding finality. It suggests that wisdom lies not in reaching the bottom of all things, but in living thoughtfully within the endlessness. But if the pursuit of certainty leads only to spirals and infinite chains, perhaps the self we build through knowledge, the I that demands understanding, must also learn to soften, to quiet, to step back. Because in the next reflection, we will explore a vision of selfhood not inflated by certainty and striving, but tempered by humility, openness, and quietness of spirit. Quiet ego hypothesis. You sit beside a still pond. The surface is calm, mirroring sky and trees with perfect clarity. When the wind stirs, the reflection shatters into ripples, a reminder that turbulence distorts while quiet reveals. This is the spirit behind the quiet ego hypothesis, a psychological and philosophical vision suggesting that the healthiest, wisest form of selfhood is not boastful, not defensive, not endlessly striving for dominance, but gently, resiliently quiet. The quiet ego is not an erased self. It is not selflessness in the sense of self-annihilation. It is a self that is balanced, aware of itself, but not obsessed with itself. Engaged with the world, but not consumed by the need to control or conquer it. Researchers like Heidi Wayment and Jack Bauer have explored the quiet ego as a psychological construct linked to well-being, empathy, wisdom, and growth. A quiet ego rests on 4 pillars. First one is perspective-taking, the ability to see from other viewpoints, to recognize that one's experience is not the center of all things. Second one is ego transcendence, a sense of self that stretches beyond narrow personal concerns, connecting to larger patterns, communities, histories. Third one is inclusive identity, an identity that embraces diversity, complexity, and interconnectedness. And finally, fourth is growth-mindedness, an openness to change, a humility before the ongoing journey of becoming. Unlike the noisy ego, which demands recognition, superiority, and validation, the quiet ego moves through the world with flexibility and grace. It listens more than it speaks. It builds rather than dominates. It questions without fear of losing itself. The quiet ego hypothesis challenges deep cultural assumptions. Much of modern life rewards loudness, assertion, branding, relentless self-promotion. The quiet ego resists this pressure, choosing depth over display, substance over noise. It suggests that true strength comes not from making the self louder, but from making it deeper, more attuned to others, more in harmony with the broader currents of life. This vision resonates with ancient traditions, Stoicism, Buddhism, Taoism, that see wisdom not as conquest of the world, but as alignment with it. The quiet ego accepts uncertainty. It embraces the provisional nature of knowledge. It recognizes that much of what we cling to, status, certainty, control, are illusions that fracture under pressure. Quietness does not mean passivity. It means clarity. A clear mind, a steady hand, a self strong enough to act without needing to shout its own name. The quiet ego invites us to ask, what am I defending? What am I trying to prove? What would it mean to live with less noise and more depth? It points to a different kind of heroism, not the conquest of others, but the quiet mastery of one's own fear and vanity. But if the quiet ego teaches balance within the self, what happens when we turn outward, when we recognize that the world itself is not governed by one supreme value, but by many values, often clashing, often irreconcilable? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a philosophy that embraces this plurality, a vision of human life not as a march toward a single goal, but as a weaving together of many, sometimes competing goods. Value pluralism. You walk through a crowded marketplace. Voices rise and fall. Merchants call out, offering spices, cloth, tools, stories. Every stall promises something different. Every path through the market offers a different adventure. There is no single right way to move through this world. This is the vision behind value pluralism, a philosophy most famously articulated by Isaiah Berlin. Value pluralism is the idea that there are many genuine, irreducible, and often incompatible values, and that no single moral system can encompass them all without loss. Freedom and equality, justice and mercy, courage and compassion. Each of these is real. Each of these matters, but sometimes they collide. In seeking perfect freedom, we might sacrifice equality. In pursuing perfect compassion, we might blunt the edges of justice. In striving for perfect order, we might trample creativity. Berlin rejected the comforting dream that all good things must be ultimately harmonious, that if only we reasoned clearly enough, we could build a society or a self where all values fit neatly together. Reality, he argued, is messier. Values grow from different human needs, different histories, different dreams. They reflect the richness and the tragedy of human life. And sometimes the deepest conflicts in our lives are not between good and evil, but between good and good. Berlin's value pluralism does not embrace relativism. Not all values are equal. Some goods are real, some are false. Some ways of life are more humane, more just, more beautiful than others. But among the true values, there is no final hierarchy, no master key, no single formula for resolving every clash. This view demands humility. It reminds us that moral and political life involves choices, and that choices often come with real costs, real sacrifices. It urges us to resist the temptation of utopias, visions of perfect societies where all tensions are resolved, where every virtue is maximized without conflict. And it encourages a deeper form of tolerance. Not the shallow tolerance of indifference, but the hard-won tolerance born of recognizing that reasonable people, seeking real goods, can still find themselves on opposing paths. Value pluralism invites us to navigate life not as mapmakers charting a single perfect course, but as travelers moving through a rich, complex landscape, honoring the beauty, the tragedy, and the difficulty of choosing among incommensurable goods. It teaches that maturity is not about finding final answers. It is about learning to live with tensions, to honor competing truths, to seek balance where certainty cannot be found. But if values themselves are plural, layered, and sometimes conflicting, what happens when we turn to belief itself, to the foundations of what we claim to know about existence, God, and ultimate meaning? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a philosophy that challenges the demand for proof, a vision that suggests belief in the deepest things might be properly basic, needing no external justification to be reasonable. Reformed epistemology. You stand at the edge of a great forest. The mist curls around ancient trees. Somewhere deep inside, you sense a path, not because you have a map, not because you have measured every step, but because something within you trusts the direction. This is the spirit behind Reformed epistemology, a philosophical view championed by Alvin Plantinga. Reformed epistemology challenges the traditional demand that belief in God or in other fundamental realities must be justified by argument or evidence in order to be rational. Instead, it claims that some beliefs, including belief in God, can be properly basic. A properly basic belief is one that does not depend on other beliefs for its justification. It is not inferred from evidence. It is foundational, like belief in the external world, the existence of other minds, or the reliability of memory. You do not argue your way to believing that the past exists. You simply trust it, unless given a reason not to. Planting argues that belief in God can function the same way. It can arise naturally, spontaneously from our experience of the world, through awe at the cosmos, through a sense of moral duty, through the feeling of divine presence, without requiring inferential proof. This view does not say that arguments for God's existence are useless. It says they are not always necessary for rational belief. Reformed epistemology pushes back against evidentialism, the view that all beliefs must be supported by sufficient evidence to be rational. Instead, it recognizes that many of our deepest convictions rest on trust, on basic ways of experiencing and interpreting reality that we are entitled to hold unless we encounter a strong defeater, a compelling reason to doubt. This reimagining of rationality reshapes the landscape of philosophical debate. It levels the field. It suggests that both believers and skeptics stand on foundations that are not self-justifying, but lived, experienced, embodied. It invites a more honest acknowledgement of how belief actually works, not as a mechanical assembly of evidence, but as a complex interplay of perception, intuition, tradition, and reflection. Reformed epistemology does not eliminate the need for critical thinking. It does not make belief immune to challenge. But it dignifies the basic trust structures upon which all knowledge, secular and religious, ultimately depends. It reminds us that reason grows from soil deeper than reason itself. It calls us to be humble about our starting points and courageous in exploring where they lead. But if belief can be properly basic, grounded not in arguments, but in experience, what happens when we ask what truly matters for justification? What is internal to the mind, or what connects us to the world outside? Because in the next reflection, we will dive into a philosophical debate that asks whether knowledge depends more on what we can access within, or on how our beliefs are tethered to the truth beyond us. Internalism versus externalism. You sit in a quiet room, sorting through the contents of your mind. Beliefs, memories, impressions, they gather like artifacts on a table. You turn them over, examine them, ask which ones are trustworthy, which ones can I truly know. But what if the truth of a belief doesn't depend solely on what lies within the mind? This is the debate between internalism and externalism, two rival visions of what it means to know. Internalism holds that the justification for a belief must be accessible from within the believer's mental life. If you claim to know something, you must be able to point inward to reasons, evidence, experiences that support your claim. Everything that makes a belief justified must be internally available, consciously or potentially accessible to reflection. Knowledge, in this view, is illuminated from within. You carry your warrant with you, like a lantern through the dark. Externalism, by contrast, holds that what matters for justification is not always internally accessible. What matters is whether your belief is connected to the world in the right way, whether it is produced by reliable processes, whether it is shaped by trustworthy mechanisms, even if you cannot always inspect or articulate those mechanisms. In externalism, knowledge is illuminated from beyond. You may be justified in believing something, even without being able to explain how, because your cognitive faculties are functioning properly in the right environment toward truth. Imagine a hiker lost in the woods. She follows a path she intuits to be correct, guided by subtle environmental cues she cannot consciously name: the bend of trees, the angle of moss, the smell of damp earth. According to internalism, unless she can articulate her reasons, her belief in the right path lacks full justification. According to externalism, if her instincts are reliable, shaped by evolutionary attunement to nature, then her belief may be justified even without conscious awareness of the evidence. Internalism prizes transparency, self-reflection, the ideal of the autonomous thinker. Externalism prizes functionality, survival, the messy reality that much of our knowledge operates beneath conscious awareness. Each approach captures something vital. Internalism reminds us that unchecked beliefs, inaccessible to scrutiny, risk error and illusion. Externalism reminds us that demanding total access to all justifying reasons may be unrealistic, that much of our trust in perception, memory, and reason rests on processes we cannot fully survey. The debate does not resolve easily. It mirrors deeper tensions between rationalism and empiricism, between the search for certainty and the acknowledgement of human finitude. And it forces us to ask, is knowledge a mirror in the mind, perfect, transparent, or a bridge thrown across the chaos of the world, sturdy even if we cannot always see its underpinnings? But if knowing demands this delicate dance between inner reflection and outer connection, what happens when we turn to a vision of wisdom that seeks not just knowledge, but a deeper harmony between soul, world, and the sacred? Because in the next reflection, we will step into an ancient and mystical tradition, one that weaves wisdom, beauty, and being into a single luminous thread. Sophiology. You walk through a sunlit grove. The leaves shimmer with golden light. The wind whispers in a language you almost understand. In this moment, brief, fragile, the world feels not random, but ordered, meaningful, alive. This is the realm of sophiology, the theology of wisdom. Rooted in ancient traditions and blossoming most vividly in Eastern Orthodox Christianity, sophiology seeks to understand wisdom not as mere knowledge or cleverness, but as a living presence, a cosmic principle, a bridge between the divine and the created world. Sophia, wisdom, is not an abstraction. She is depicted as luminous, radiant, intimately woven into the fabric of reality. In Hebrew scripture, wisdom dances at the dawn of creation. When he established the heavens, I was there rejoicing in his inhabited world. In Christian mysticism, Sophia becomes a symbol of God's self-expression, the pattern, beauty, and order that permeate all things. To encounter wisdom, in this view, is to touch the pulse of the universe. The Russian theologians Vladimir Solovyov, Pavel Florensky, and Sergei Bulgakov developed sophiology into a rich philosophical vision. They saw Sophia as the soul of the world, the divine archetype through which creation unfolds. She is the image of divine beauty reflected in the natural order. She is the inner coherence of truth, goodness, and love. She is the hidden song that binds spirit and matter into a single living harmony. Sophiology offers a vision where science, art, and spirituality are not enemies, but different languages for praising the same underlying wisdom. It invites us to see the universe not as a dead mechanism, but as a living icon. A painting not merely of atoms and forces, but of meaning, relationship, and divine joy. In sophiology, the pursuit of wisdom is not a conquest of knowledge. It is a participation in the divine life. It is a listening, a reverence, a cultivation of inner stillness that mirrors the harmony of creation itself. Wisdom, in this sense, is both transcendent and immanent. It is the light that shines from beyond the world and the light that gleams within it. To live wisely is to live attuned, to hear the music beneath the noise, to glimpse the tapestry behind the fleeting events of time. Sophiology calls for humility. It reminds us that true knowledge is not domination, but communion. That understanding the world means entering into relationship with it, with wonder, with gratitude, with awe. But if sociology dreams of uniting science, beauty, and faith into a single song, what happens when we accept that some domains of truth might forever speak different languages, that science and religion might be separate magisteria, each sovereign in its own realm? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a philosophy that proposes not fusion, but respectful coexistence, a vision where the paths of empirical knowledge and spiritual meaning run parallel without crossing. Non-overlapping magisteria. You walk along a long, ancient wall. On one side, artists paint visions of wonder, myth, meaning morality. On the other side, scientists chart the movements of stars, the evolution of life, the workings of the atom. Each side is vibrant, rich, essential. Each side honors different truths. This is the vision behind non-overlapping magisteria, a concept proposed by the paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould. Gould argued that science and religion are distinct domains, or magisteria, each with its own proper authority and method. Science concerns itself with empirical facts, the structure of the natural world, the causes of physical phenomena, the patterns and laws that can be observed, tested, and refined. Religion concerns itself with ultimate meanings, questions of purpose, value, and moral duty, matters that lie beyond the reach of microscopes and equations. According to Gould, these two domains do not conflict because they do not overlap. Science does not have the tools to answer why suffering matters or whether life has meaning. Religion does not have the tools to determine the age of the earth or the genetic basis of disease. Each magisterium is sovereign within its domain. Each speaks its own language. This vision seeks peace. In a world often torn between scientism, the claim that science can answer all questions, and dogmatism, the claim that faith can overrule empirical inquiry, non-overlapping magisteria offers a middle way. It suggests that both science and religion can thrive without invading each other's territory. But the idea is not without tension. Some critics argue that the boundary between fact and value is not always clean. Questions about human origins, consciousness, and ethics often intertwine scientific discovery and spiritual meaning. Others argue that religious claims sometimes do venture into the empirical, making factual assertions about miracles, creation, or historical events. Still, Gould's vision remains a powerful framework for dialogue. It reminds us that not every question must be answered with a telescope or a theorem. And not every truth must be wrapped in ritual and mystery. Science teaches us how the heavens go. Religion teaches us how to go to heaven. Or perhaps more humbly, science teaches us how the world is. Religion teaches us how we might live within it. Non-overlapping magisteria invites mutual respect, an acknowledgement that different forms of understanding serve different human needs. It urges us to celebrate the richness of human inquiry without forcing it all into a single mold. But if knowledge and meaning operate in different domains, how do they connect? How does the world of matter relate to the world of mind? How does the physical give rise to the mental, the moral, the meaningful? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a theory that seeks to bridge these layers of reality, a vision of higher truths arising from the fabric of the physical world, not by magic, but by deep, intricate dependence. Supervenience Theory. You gaze at a painting, a rich tapestry of colors, forms, emotions. Change a single brushstroke, alter a single hue, and the entire feeling of the painting shifts. The surface beauty depends on the physical arrangement beneath. This is the spirit of supervenience theory, a concept that tries to explain how higher-level properties, like beauty, mind, or morality, depend on the lower-level physical realities without being reducible to them. Supervenience suggests a profound relationship between layers of reality. In simple terms, if two things are identical in all their physical properties, they must also be identical in all their higher-level properties. No difference in the mind without a difference in the brain. No difference in beauty without a difference in arrangement. No difference in ethics without a difference in actions and intentions. Higher realities supervene on the lower. They emerge, they depend, they are tethered, but they are not simply the same. Imagine a novel. The story, its tragedy, its humor, its meaning supervenes on the ink and paper. Change the arrangement of letters, and the story changes. Yet the story is not just the ink. It is something more, a pattern, a structure, an experience born from, but not reducible to the physical medium. Supervenience theory emerged in the 20th century, finding a home in philosophy of mind, ethics, aesthetics, and metaphysics. Philosophers like Donald Davidson and Jaegwon Kim used it to describe how mental states depend on physical brain states without collapsing mind into matter. It preserves both dependence and distinctiveness. It says mind depends on brain, but mind is not simply identical to brain. Similarly, moral properties supervene on natural facts, on actions, consequences, intentions, but they are not mere summaries of those facts. Supervenience resists the temptation of reductionism, the urge to flatten all reality into a single layer, to explain away the richness of higher forms by dissolving them into physics or chemistry alone. It honors the layered, intricate, emergent structure of existence. But supervenience theory also invites hard questions. If higher properties supervene on lower ones, but are not reducible, what explains the connection? Is it necessity, contingency, some hidden law? And if the higher depends entirely on the lower, do we risk losing the autonomy, the dignity, the reality of our inner lives, our thoughts, hopes, and dreams? Supervenience walks a delicate line. It preserves the marvel of emergence, the way simple elements give rise to astonishing complexity, without abandoning the grounding of the physical world. It teaches that the layers of reality are not separate islands, but intimately linked. Change the base, and the surface shifts. Stability at one level sustains the richness at another. But if knowledge, beauty, and morality arise through these delicate dependencies, what happens when the structures that support knowing itself, trust, credibility, voice, are warped and denied? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a philosophy that reveals how injustice can twist not just politics and rights, but knowledge itself, how power can silence truth even before it can be spoken. Epistemic injustice. You sit around a fire, listening to stories. Some voices rise easily, shaping the memory of the night. Others are ignored, interrupted, doubted before they can fully speak. Not all voices are heard equally. This is the core insight behind epistemic injustice, a concept developed by philosopher Miranda Fricker. Epistemic injustice occurs when someone is wronged specifically in their capacity as a knower. It is not just harm to the body, or the rights, or the freedom of a person. It is harm to their very ability to contribute to knowledge, to be recognized as a source of truth. Fricker identifies two primary forms. First, testimonial injustice. This happens when a speaker's word is given less credibility because of prejudice, because of their gender, race, class, accent, or any marker that society has historically marginalized. A woman speaks in a meeting, and her ideas are dismissed, only to be praised later when repeated by a man. A person of color testifies in court, but their sincerity is doubted from the start. The harm is subtle but deep. It undermines not just the individual's standing, but the very structure of shared knowledge. Second, hermeneutical injustice. This happens when a group of people lacks the concepts, language, or social recognition needed to make sense of their experiences. Before the term sexual harassment entered public consciousness, countless women experienced it, but lacked the words to name it, to explain it, to be heard. Without the right conceptual tools, suffering remains private, misunderstood, invisible. Hermeneutical injustice shows that ignorance is not always a matter of personal failure. Sometimes society itself fails to create the conditions where certain truths can be spoken, heard, and understood. Epistemic injustice reveals that knowledge is not built in a vacuum. It emerges through dialogue, through trust, through mutual recognition. When some voices are systematically silenced or distorted, knowledge itself suffers. The collective search for truth becomes skewed, partial, impoverished. Fricker's work invites a profound rethinking of justice. It challenges us to recognize that oppression operates not just through violence or exclusion, but through the subtle erosion of credibility, the quiet devaluation of certain knowers. It calls for virtues like testimonial justice, the conscious effort to correct for prejudice, to listen with fairness and openness. And it calls for hermeneutical sensitivity, the willingness to expand our frameworks of understanding, to listen even when words falter, to make room for new forms of meaning. Epistemic injustice is a call to rebuild the community of knowers, to weave a world where knowledge is not the privilege of a few, but the shared endeavor of all. But if injustice distorts human voices, silencing some and privileging others, what happens when we turn to the voices beyond the human, to the cries, the experiences, the suffering of animals? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a radical critique that asks whether philosophy itself has been complicit in ignoring the lives that look back at us with silent, pleading eyes. Animal ethics. You meet the gaze of an animal. It is not a mirror of your own soul, not a reflection of human thought. It is other, vivid, silent, undeniably present. Jacques Derrida lingered on that gaze. In his later work, Derrida turned his attention to a profound blind spot in Western philosophy, the way it has systematically ignored, diminished, and justified the suffering of animals. His critique is not a conventional argument for animal rights. It is a deeper unsettling, a deconstruction of how language, power, and thought have fenced the human off from the rest of life. Western philosophy, Derrida argued, has built a concept called the animal, a single monolithic category that erases the infinite diversity of living beings. The animal, as if a mouse, an elephant, a bird, and a dolphin could all be collapsed into one. This abstraction serves a purpose. It draws a sharp line, human versus non-human, rational versus irrational, moral versus amoral. It grants humans the right to dominate, exploit, kill, without truly seeing the beings we harm. Derrida asks us to notice the violence hidden in our very ways of speaking. He asks us to feel the shock of being looked at by an animal, not as an object, not as a lesser being, but as another subject, another center of experience. That gaze breaks the illusion of human superiority. It demands a response. Not an abstract theorizing about rights and duties, but a direct ethical encounter, an acknowledgement of vulnerability, suffering, and shared existence. Derrida's critique exposes the comfortable myths we tell ourselves. That humans alone have language. That humans alone suffer meaningfully. That humans alone possess dignity. These myths dissolve in the face of the real, the trembling of a hunted animal, the pain of a creature used for profit, the silent waiting of lives we prefer not to see. Animal ethics for Derrida is not about extending a pre-existing human morality to animals. It is about fundamentally rethinking what it means to be moral at all. It is about questioning the structures that let suffering be invisible. It is about recognizing the limits of language, the fragility of our categories, the violence hidden in the ordinary. And it is about mourning. Mourning not just for individual animals, but for the broken relationships, the lost possibilities of kinship and respect. Derrida's work challenges us to live with more vulnerability, more openness, more willingness to let the other's gaze undo our illusions. But if Derrida teaches us to see animals not as its but as thous, what happens when we step even further into a vision where all of nature is alive, aware, ensouled? Because in the next reflection, we will explore an ancient and enduring philosophy that sees spirit and consciousness shimmering throughout the world, in river and rock, in tree and storm, in all the living dance of existence. Animism. You step into a dense forest at twilight. The trees seem to breathe. The river hums a low, ancient song. The stones at your feet carry a presence, a silent watchfulness. The river hums a low, ancient song. In this world, everything speaks. Everything is alive. This is the vision of animism, not simply a religious belief, but a deep philosophical orientation that sees the world as saturated with life, spirit, and awareness. Animism is often misunderstood. It is not the childish fantasy of rocks and trees with cartoonish faces. It is a profound way of relating to the world, one that refuses to see nature as inert, mechanical, or dead. In philosophical animism, the boundaries between person and thing blur. The river has a story. The mountain has an existence not reducible to geology. The wind carries more than molecules. Everything participates in a larger web of meaning, agency, and interconnection. Animistic worldviews are among the oldest human perspectives, found across indigenous cultures on every continent. They challenge the dualisms that shaped much of Western thought, such as nature versus culture, spirit versus matter, human versus non-human. Animism collapses these divisions. It offers a universe where everything is relational, communicative, alive. Modern philosophical interest in animism has grown as thinkers grapple with the ecological crises born from treating the earth as an object to exploit. Philosophers like David Abram argue that rediscovering an animistic sensibility is not a regression, but a healing, a way to reweave ourselves back into the living tapestry we have tried to stand above. Animism demands a different kind of knowing. Not analysis from a distance, but participation. Not objectification, but dialogue. Not domination, but reverence. Not domination, but reverence. It teaches that mountains are not just resources, they are presences. That animals are not just instincts in fur and feather, they are communities, with ways of being we can learn from, not just categorize. Animism is not naive. It does not deny that nature can be brutal, chaotic, indifferent to individual human desires. But it insists that even in its violence, the earth is not dead. It is not a machine. It is a living matrix of forces, beings, intelligences, many beyond human comprehension. Philosophical animism invites humility. It invites wonder. It invites us to ask, what if we are not the masters of a mute world, but kin within a speaking cosmos? And it asks whether the path to a sustainable future lies not only in technology and regulation, but in the deep work of re-enchanting our relationship with all that leaves. But if animism reawakens a sense of kinship with all life, what happens when we take this reverence even further, when we see every species, every ecosystem, not as a resource to be managed, but as an intrinsic good, a sacred community deserving of respect on its own terms? Because in the next reflection, we will step into a philosophy that demands not just sustainable living, but a profound shift in how we understand our place within the great living earth. Deep ecology. You climb a high mountain ridge. The air thins. The trees give way to rock and sky. Below you stretches a living world, rivers winding like silver threads, forests breathing in slow rhythms, distant herds moving across the land. You feel for a moment not above it all, but within it. This is the spirit of deep ecology, a philosophical and environmental movement founded by Arne Naess in the 1970s. Deep ecology is not simply a call for better environmental policies. It is a radical rethinking of the human relationship to the earth. At its core is the recognition that all living beings have intrinsic value not based on their usefulness to humans, but value simply because they exist. A wolf in the forest, a tree in the desert, a coral reef in the deep. Each has a right to flourish, independent of human interests. Naess distinguished deep ecology from what he called shallow ecology. Shallow ecology seeks to protect nature for human benefit, to ensure clean air, fertile soil, beautiful parks. Deep ecology demands more. It demands that we see ourselves not as rulers or managers of the natural world, but as one strand in a vast, intricate web of life. It challenges the anthropocentric, human-centered worldview that has dominated Western civilization. It invites a shift from man and environment to man as part of environment. Deep ecology is built on key principles. The well-being and flourishing of human and non-human life have intrinsic value. The richness and diversity of life forms contribute to these values and are values in themselves. Humans have no right to reduce this richness and diversity except to satisfy vital needs. A substantial decrease in human population and consumption is needed to respect these values. The present human interference with the non-human world is excessive, and the situation is rapidly worsening. These principles lead to a profound ethical and existential transformation, not just recycling more, not just using greener technologies, but changing how we see ourselves, as kin among kin, as members, not masters, as participants in a sacred community of life. Deep ecology also invites a spiritual dimension. It recognizes that defending the earth is not just a political or scientific task, it is a moral, even sacred calling. It demands not just action, but awakening. An awakening to the beauty, complexity, and dignity of every creature, every forest, every river. Deep ecology is not naive. It does not imagine a return to a pristine Eden. It calls for wisdom, for knowing that technological solutions alone cannot save us without a deeper change in heart and mind. It calls for courage, for resisting the forces of exploitation, even when they are profitable or convenient. And it calls for love, a fierce, enduring love for a world we did not create, but which sustains us with every breath. But if deep ecology asks us to confront the destruction of the natural world with reverence and responsibility, what happens when we turn to another deep taboo, the reality of death itself? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a philosophy that invites us to embrace mortality, not with fear, but with honesty, gratitude, and even celebration. Death positivity philosophy. You walk through an old cemetery. Stone markers lean under the weight of time, names, dates, and epitaphs, weathered nearly smooth by wind and rain. Birds call from the branches above, and life continues, even here. There is no fear in this place. Only remembrance. Only presence. This is the spirit of death positivity, a philosophy that invites us to face mortality not as a terror to be hidden away, but as a fundamental part of life to be acknowledged, honored, and even embraced. In a culture often obsessed with youth, vitality, and endless growth, death is treated as an intruder, an enemy to be fought, delayed, denied. We build walls of euphemism around it. We sterilize it in hospitals. We hide it from daily life, pushing it to the margins of awareness. But death positivity asks, what if this avoidance deepens fear rather than eases it? What if by shunning death, we also shun a deeper, fuller relationship with life itself? Movements like the Order of the Good Death, founded by mortician and author Caitlin Doughty, advocate for a cultural shift. They call for openness about dying, honest conversations about mortality, and practices that restore death to its rightful place in the human story. Death positivity does not glorify death. It does not rush toward it, nor diminish its sorrow. It simply refuses to treat death as shameful, obscene, or unmentionable. It sees death as a natural, meaningful part of existence, a teacher, a reminder, a closing chapter that gives the whole story shape and poignancy. Philosophically, death positivity echoes ancient wisdom. The Stoics urge daily reflection on death to sharpen gratitude for the present. Buddhist teachings call attention to impermanence as the foundation of compassion and liberation. In death positivity, mortality becomes not a curse, but a mirror. It reflects back to us what truly matters. It clarifies our choices. It strips away illusion. To live with death in mind is to live more vividly, to cherish fleeting moments, to mend broken relationships, to risk dreams before time slips away. Death positivity also urges a reclaiming of death rituals. Family-led funerals, green burials, death education, These practices reconnect us to the reality that dying is not merely a medical event, but a communal, spiritual, deeply human passage. It invites us to plan our own endings thoughtfully, with courage and love, sparing our loved ones confusion and fear. And it reminds us that mourning, like dying, is not a failure. It is an act of love. To grieve deeply is to have loved deeply. To mourn openly is to honor both the living and the dead. Death positivity teaches that we are not separate from the cycle. We are not exempt. We are not cheated. We are part of the great turning, birth, life, death, renewal, woven into the breathing fabric of existence. But if death positivity helps us embrace the finitude of individual life, what happens when we turn to the great forces shaping collective life, history, labor, power, and ask how change itself arises from conflict, from contradiction, from the restless unfolding of material conditions? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a philosophy that sees history not as a steady march or divine plan, but as a living dialectic, a drama of struggle and transformation at the heart of the material world. Dialectical Materialism. You watch the river carve through stone, not in a day, not in a year, but through patient, relentless pressure. Forces meet, resist, transform. New landscapes are born, not from stillness, but from struggle. This is the spirit of dialectical materialism, a philosophical framework most closely associated with Karl Marx, though its roots stretch back to earlier thinkers like Hegel and Feuerbach. At its heart, dialectical materialism sees reality, especially human history, as dynamic, not static. It is a vision of a world constantly in motion, shaped by contradictions, conflicts, and their resolution. But while Hegel framed dialectics as the unfolding of spirit or idea, Marx turned the focus downward to matter, to economics, to the concrete realities of human life. For Marx, it is not thought that drives history. It is material conditions. It is hunger, labor, technology, production, the gritty, embodied facts of existence. Dialectical materialism rests on a few key insights. First, matter is primary. Consciousness arises from material conditions, not the other way around. Second, change is driven by contradiction. Every system contains internal tensions between forces and relations of production, between classes, between needs and realities, that eventually lead to transformation. And third, history is a process. It unfolds through stages, shaped by how humans organize labor and resources, moving from feudalism to capitalism, and, Marx hoped, eventually beyond. Dialectical materialism rejects static pictures of the world. Society is not a fixed arrangement to be tinkered with. It is a living, evolving process, full of conflict, rupture, creativity, and collapse. The factory worker and the factory owner do not merely disagree. They embody opposing interests, locked in a structural contradiction. The old economic order, the ways of owning, producing, distributing, eventually becomes a fetter on new possibilities. Revolution arises not from idealism, but from the grinding realities of life. Marx's dialectic is not cold determinism. It is the story of human agency within material limits. Humans make history, but not under conditions of their own choosing. Dialectical materialism invites us to see not just events, but the hidden forces beneath events. It calls us to look at the base, the economic foundation beneath the superstructure of politics, culture, religion, and ideology. It challenges moral idealism that imagines society can be changed by goodwill alone, without altering the material conditions that shape life. Dialectical thinking teaches that no system, no law, no tradition, no institution is eternal. Everything carries within it the seeds of its own transformation. It invites vigilance to see where contradictions are sharpening, where old forms are cracking, where new possibilities are struggling to be born. But if dialectical materialism shows that history is made through conflict and transformation, what happens when we turn to a vision that seeks to dissolve the very structures of power and domination, to imagine a world beyond the state, beyond coercive authority, beyond imposed hierarchy? Because in the next reflection, we will step into a philosophy that dreams of freedom so radical, it reimagines the very foundations of society itself. Anarchism. You stand before a towering wall. Beyond it, you hear the hum of life, free, unpredictable, vibrant. The wall promises order, security, control, but it also casts a long shadow. What if the wall is not protection, but a prison? This is the spirit of anarchism, not chaos, not violence, but a profound philosophical question about the nature and legitimacy of authority itself. At its heart, anarchism challenges the assumption that hierarchical structures, states, governments, coercive institutions, are necessary or just. It asks, what if human beings could organize life without rulers, without domination, without imposed obedience? Anarchism is often caricatured as a call for disorder, but its deepest currents flow from an aspiration toward greater order, an order arising from free cooperation, mutual aid, voluntary association. Philosophers like William Godwin, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Mikhail Bakunin, and Emma Goldman shaped this tradition. They argued that the state, far from being the guardian of peace, is often the machinery of oppression, inequality, and violence. Proudhon famously declared, "Property is theft, not to abolish possession, but to critique the legal fictions that allowed a few to monopolize resources while others starved." Bakunin warned that even revolutionary governments, once in power, would become new tyrannies. Goldman insisted that true liberty could not be handed down by law or decree. It had to be lived, struggled for, claimed. Philosophical anarchism rests on a few key insights. It begins with a deep skepticism of authority, the belief that all forms of power must justify themselves. If they cannot, they deserve to be dismantled. It is rooted in a faith in human capacity, the idea that people are capable of organizing themselves, building communities, and solving problems without the need for coercive rule. It embraces the principle of mutual aid, trusting that cooperation, not competition, is the natural basis for social life. And it dreams of voluntary association, a world where social structures are formed by free agreement, not by force. Anarchism is not naive. It recognizes that conflict, disagreement, and selfishness are part of human nature. But it argues that coercive hierarchies do not eliminate these problems, they often make them worse. Freedom, responsibility, and solidarity grow not from chains, but from choice. Philosophical anarchism is not a utopian blueprint. It is a method, a horizon, a relentless questioning of domination in all its forms, political, economic, social, even psychological. It invites experimentation. It embraces diversity of forms. It trusts that communities, if given space and respect, can create better, fairer, more humane ways of living. Anarchism is, above all, a wager. A wager that freedom is possible, that obedience is not the price of peace, that the structures we have inherited are not the only ones we can imagine. But if anarchism challenges the necessity of external authority, what happens when we confront the forces that seem even deeper than politics, the forces of fate, causality, and necessity themselves? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a philosophical tension older than empires. The haunting question of whether our lives are shaped by freedom, by iron necessity, or by something even stranger. Fatalism versus determinism. You find yourself standing at a crossroads. The paths stretch out before you, winding through forests, climbing over hills, disappearing into distant mist. You choose one, perhaps after long thought, perhaps on impulse, and you walk. But somewhere, a question lingers: was this choice ever truly free? Or was it, in some deep sense, inevitable? This is the tension between fatalism and determinism, two ancient ways of thinking about fate, causality, and human freedom. Fatalism whispers that the future is already written, that no matter what you choose, no matter how you struggle, the outcome is fixed. That some cosmic script, the will of the gods, the alignment of stars, the decree of destiny, has already sealed your path. In fatalism, choice is illusion. Freedom is a dream we tell ourselves to soften the blow. The fatalist gazes at the river and sees it already reaching the sea, no matter how it twists and turns. Determinism, however, speaks with a different voice. It agrees that events are bound by cause and effect, that everything that happens, every thought, every action, every breath is the consequence of prior conditions playing out according to the laws of nature. But determinism does not necessarily erase agency. It says that our choices are caused, shaped by genetics, upbringing, culture, circumstance, but still meaningful. You choose because you are who you are, shaped by the endless chain of causes that brought you here. Determinism sees the river not as a scripted journey, but as a dynamic flow, responding to every stone, every curve of the land, inevitable in its unfolding, but alive with variation. The difference is subtle but profound. Fatalism flattens effort. If the outcome is sealed, why strive? Why hope? Determinism deepens responsibility. It suggests that our actions matter precisely because they are real expressions of our nature and our history. Under fatalism, you are an actor reciting lines. Under determinism, you are an author, influenced, constrained, but still writing within the grammar of the world. Philosophers have wrestled with this distinction for centuries. Is freedom compatible with determinism? Can we be truly responsible for actions that were, in some sense, inevitable? Compatibilists argue yes, that freedom is not the absence of cause, but the ability to act according to one's character, one's reasons, one's values. Hard determinists argue no, that choice is only a story we tell ourselves after the fact. And beyond them, existentialists and pragmatists seek to redefine freedom not as an escape from causality, but as the courage to create meaning within it. The debate endures because it touches something raw and urgent in the human heart. We want to matter. We want our choices to count. And yet we sense the vast currents that carry us, currents of biology, history, chance. To live is to walk this tension, to be a creature of necessity, dreaming of freedom. But if our choices are shaped, if our freedom is complex and contested, what does it mean to bear responsibility, to own our actions, to stand accountable, not just to others, but to ourselves? Because in the next reflection, we will wrestle with the fragile, beautiful, and often painful balance between freedom and responsibility, the twin pillars of what it means to be human. The tension between freedom and responsibility. It could be small, a word spoken, a promise made, a path taken, or it could be vast, a career, a relationship, a life reshaped. In that moment, you feel both the exhilaration of freedom and the heavy weight of responsibility. You stand at the threshold of a choice. This is the delicate, often painful tension at the heart of being human. Freedom without responsibility is chaos, a reckless scattering of action without care for consequence. Responsibility without freedom is oppression, a life weighed down by duties imposed from without the dignity of choice. To live well, we must somehow hold both. Freedom means possibility. It means that your life is not fully written by your past, your circumstances, your biology, your history. It means you can choose to speak or to remain silent, to build or to destroy, to love or to withdraw. But every act of freedom writes a chapter in the story of who you are. Every choice shapes not just your future, but the person you are becoming. And this is where responsibility enters. Responsibility means answering for your choices, owning their consequences, intended or unintended. Facing the fact that freedom is not just a privilege, but a burden. To choose is to foreclose other possibilities. To act is to risk failure, regret, harm. Responsibility asks us to be honest about that risk, to bear it with courage, to resist the easy temptation to blame fate, others, or circumstance for what we have freely chosen. Man is condemned to be free, Sartre wrote. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre captured this tension vividly. Not because freedom is a punishment, but because once thrown into existence with no divine script to follow, we must choose. And with each choice, we affirm a vision of what matters, of what should be. There is no hiding. Even refusing to choose is a choice. Even denial is a decision. Freedom and responsibility are bound together, inseparable. One gives meaning to the other. Without freedom, responsibility is cruelty. This tension is not an unfortunate flaw. Without responsibility, freedom is emptiness. It is the price of dignity. It means that our lives are not merely reactions. They are acts of creation, sometimes beautiful, sometimes tragic, but always real. Living with this tension requires humility, knowing we will sometimes fail, knowing that we are fallible, fragile, unfinished. But it also requires courage. The courage to act, to own, to begin again. To live is to balance on this tightrope, never perfectly, always precariously between the wide sky of possibility and the solid ground of accountability. But if freedom and responsibility define our human condition, what happens when we try to flee from them, when we deny our freedom, cling to false identities, and deceive ourselves about who we are? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a profound existential insight, Sartre's notion of facticity and bad faith, and the quiet ways we betray our own freedom. Facticity and bad faith. You sit in a small cafe, watching the world move past the window. The clatter of dishes, the laughter of strangers, the pull of unspoken dreams, all flow around you. For a moment, you feel the weight of your own existence, the life you have lived, the life you have yet to live, and the subtle temptation to pretend you are merely what the world sees. This is the terrain of facticity and bad faith, concepts explored by Jean-Paul Sartre as part of his sweeping vision of human freedom. Facticity refers to the concrete facts of your existence, your birth, your past, your body, your culture, your circumstances. These are not choices. They are the givens, the conditions you are thrown into. They shape your possibilities, but they do not exhaust them. Freedom, for Sartre, is the constant power to transcend facticity, to interpret it, to respond to it, to project new possibilities into the world. You are not simply what you are. You are what you choose to become, moment by moment. Bad faith arises when we deny this freedom, when we tell ourselves, I cannot change, because I am just this. When we cling to roles, labels, and excuses, pretending they define us completely. The waiter who becomes only a waiter, moving with mechanical gestures, thinking with borrowed thoughts, is living in bad faith. The lover who insists, I cannot help how I feel, as if emotions were storms without roots or choice, is living in bad faith. The person who says, I am what I am and nothing more, refuses the unsettling truth that being human means being more than any fixed identity. Bad faith is not simple lying. It is self-deception. It is the attempt to flee from the anxiety of freedom. Because to be free is to bear the burden of responsibility, to admit that every moment, every breath carries the possibility and the demand to choose. Sartre does not suggest that we can shed facticity like an old coat. You cannot wish away your past, your culture, your limitations. But you are never merely those things. You are not a prisoner of what has been. You are a being in motion, a project, a becoming, a possibility. Living authentically means embracing this tension. It means seeing your facticity clearly, without denial, and yet refusing to be confined by it. It means standing at the crossroads of past and future and daring to say, I will make meaning. I will choose. Even when it is hard. Even when it is frightening. Bad faith is the easy path, the comfortable slide into inertia. Authenticity is the hard path, the courageous acceptance that you are never finished, never fixed, never excused from freedom. But if freedom demands that we choose, that we constantly shape ourselves through our actions, what happens when choice itself seems paralyzed, when no option clearly pulls stronger than another? Because in the next reflection, we will explore an ancient and puzzling dilemma, the strange case of Buridan's ass, and the haunting question of whether perfect balance can lead not to freedom, but to death. Buridan's ass dilemma. Picture a donkey standing in a quiet field. On its left, a pile of fresh hay. On its right, an equally inviting pile of fresh hay. Both are identical. Both are within easy reach. Yet the donkey, faced with two perfectly balanced choices, cannot decide. It hesitates. It wavers. And according to the ancient story, it dies of hunger, not because there was no food, but because no option outweighed the other. This is Buridan's ass, an allegory that reveals the strange paralysis that can arise when freedom meets perfect symmetry. Named after the 14th century philosopher Jean Buridan, though likely older in origin, the dilemma forces us to confront a disturbing possibility. If every reason is balanced, if every choice feels equally weighted, does choice itself collapse? Buridan's ass is not just a whimsical fable. It echoes profound philosophical anxieties about reason, will, and action. If human beings are purely rational agents, choosing based solely on reasons, preferences, and calculations, then perfect balance should mean perfect paralysis. But in reality, we rarely, if ever, freeze this way. Even when torn between two options, we eventually choose, not because one reason triumphs, but because something beyond calculation intervenes. Maybe it's impulse, maybe it's imagination. Maybe it's a tiny, unmeasurable flicker of preference, the way one pile of hay catches the light, the way one path stirs a forgotten memory. Maybe it is freedom. Buridan's ass raises unsettling questions. If pure reason can lead to paralysis, if perfect logic results in death, then maybe action requires something irrational, or at least something beyond reason. Perhaps to live is to leap, to act not when certainty is achieved, but when certainty remains elusive. The dilemma also touches the heart of decision-making in moral and political life. In a world of competing values, conflicting goods, uncertain futures, we often stand like the donkey, pulled between options, waiting for clarity that never fully comes. To wait forever is to waste our lives. To act is to risk. To choose without guarantees. Buridan's ass teaches that inaction can be deadlier than mistake. It reminds us that perfect balance is not always an ideal to be achieved. Sometimes it is a trap to be escaped. Sometimes the courage to act, even imperfectly, even blindly, is what keeps life moving forward. But if hesitation can kill, what about tolerance? What happens when a society tolerates so much that it endangers the very conditions that make tolerance possible? Because in the next reflection, we will step into a paradox posed by Karl Popper, a warning about how openness, if left unchecked, can become the doorway to its own destruction. Paradox of tolerance. Imagine a vast public square. Voices rise from every corner. Debates, songs, protests, celebrations, ideas clash and mingle in the open air. Freedom lives here, in the marketplace of expression. But at the edges of the square, a darker voice emerges. It does not seek dialogue. It seeks domination. It mocks the openness that allowed it entry. It demands the silence of others. It grows louder, more aggressive, until the square itself trembles. This is the danger at the heart of the paradox of tolerance, a concept articulated by philosopher Karl Popper in the shadow of the 20th century's darkest moments. Popper argued that a tolerant society must paradoxically be intolerant of intolerance. If tolerance is extended without limit, even to those who are openly intolerant, then tolerance itself will be destroyed. Because the intolerant do not merely disagree, they seek to eliminate disagreement. They seek to shut down debate, to impose uniformity, to crush diversity. If left unchecked, their rise is not a victory for freedom. It is the end of freedom. Popper's warning is not a call for censorship of unpopular ideas. It is a recognition that ideas which aim to annihilate the very conditions of open society cannot be treated as just another opinion. A society that values free speech, pluralism, and democratic life must defend those values, even at times by setting limits. The paradox is sharp. Tolerance requires strength. It requires the wisdom to distinguish between disagreement, which strengthens democracy, and the deliberate dismantling of the institutions that make democracy possible. It requires the courage to say some forces, though clothed in the language of rights, seek only the destruction of rights. The paradox of tolerance resonates today more than ever. In an age of polarized media, weaponized misinformation, and resurgent extremism, the challenge is real. How do we remain open without becoming defenseless? How do we uphold freedom without letting it be used as a weapon against itself? Popper offers no easy formula. He offers a vigilance, a humility, a readiness to defend the fragile structures that allow difference to coexist. Tolerance, properly understood, is not passive. It is an active, ongoing, sometimes painful work of protection and discernment. But if defending truth requires careful discernment, what happens when our very tools of reasoning are misused? Because in the next reflection, we will explore a famous principle of simplicity, Occam's razor, and the subtle ways it can be distorted and misunderstood. Occam's razor. You sit before two maps. One is intricate, twisting paths, elaborate symbols, complex legends. The other is clean, simple lines, clear directions, elegant design. Which one do you trust? Often, the mind favors the simple, the neat, the elegant. This instinct finds ancient philosophical expression in Occam's razor, a principle often summarized as entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity. In other words, when explaining something, do not add more assumptions than needed. It is a rule of thumb for clarity, for economy, for resisting the seductive pull of unnecessary complexity. But over time, Occam's razor has been sharpened and sometimes blunted by distortion and misuse. The true spirit of Occam's razor is not that the simpler explanation is always right. It is that unnecessary complexity, assumptions not supported by evidence, should be avoided. The razor is a tool for trimming fat, not for denying nuance. Yet it is often wielded clumsily or strategically to dismiss uncomfortable ideas too quickly. Your theory sounds complicated, therefore it must be wrong. This explanation is simpler, therefore it is true. But simplicity alone is not a guarantee of truth. Reality itself is often messy, complex, full of interwoven causes, hidden variables, tangled systems. In science, in philosophy, in daily life, the simpler theory is often a starting point, not a final verdict. Occam's razor encourages us to resist unnecessary invention, invisible demons, ad hoc explanations, bloated mechanisms. It does not license us to ignore complexity when complexity is real. It does not tell us that the simplest story is automatically the truest, only that, all else being equal, it is the most prudent to adopt until evidence demands otherwise. Misusing the razor can lead to a dangerous anti-intellectualism, a flattening of nuance, a suspicion of all complexity as suspicious or elitist. True wisdom lies in discernment, knowing when simplicity reveals truth and when it masks it, knowing that elegance in thought is a virtue, but reality itself is under no obligation to be elegant. Occam's razor is a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It invites precision, not brutality. It reminds us that while simplicity can be beautiful, only fidelity to evidence makes it trustworthy. But if our reasoning tools are delicate, easily misapplied, what happens when we fall into even deeper logical traps, when we confuse existence with assumption, mistaking what is merely spoken about for what must be real? Because in the next reflection, we will encounter the existential fallacy, a subtle error that reveals how easily the mind can slip from logic to illusion. Existential fallacy. Imagine someone speaking of unicorns. They tell long stories about their shimmering horns, their wild grace, their secret forests. They argue about how unicorns behave, what they desire, what laws should govern their kingdoms. And somewhere quietly, a crucial question gets lost. Do unicorns even exist? This is the heart of the existential fallacy, a logical error where we assume the existence of something simply because we speak of it, define it, or reason about it. In formal logic, the fallacy often appears when arguments improperly shift from conditional claims to existential claims. For example, all unicorns have horns. Therefore, there must be unicorns. The first statement defines a property. The second leaps into assuming existence. But properties do not summon beings into reality. Describing a thing's features does not prove the thing is real. In everyday life, the existential fallacy sneaks into debates about morality, politics, even science. We argue passionately about the characteristics of the ideal citizen, the invisible hand of the market, or pure evil, without asking whether these things exist as coherent, grounded realities, or merely as concepts. It is easier, safer, to discuss what something would be like than to confront whether it truly is. Existential fallacy flourishes when imagination outpaces evidence. When the mind spins webs of abstraction without anchoring them to the ground, philosophers remind us that existence is a heavy claim. To say that something exists is not to describe it vaguely or wishfully, but to affirm it within reality's hard frame. Kant distinguished between being as a mere logical concept and existence as something that cannot be simply deduced. It must be encountered, grounded, affirmed by experience. The fallacy teaches a kind of humility. Not every beautiful idea is a reality. Not every vivid description is a discovery. It urges us to ask the hard question. Before we debate the nature of a thing, have we truly established that the thing is there at all? In an age flooded with narratives, models, ideologies, and thought experiments, this vigilance matters more than ever. Words are powerful. But words alone do not make worlds. Concepts are necessary. But without anchoring, they can lead us into labyrinths of illusion. The existential fallacy is a quiet invitation to be honest with ourselves, to pause, to check, to ask, are we building castles in the air or walking on solid ground? But if questioning existence is difficult, what happens when existence itself becomes an endless cycle, when the moments we live are not fleeting but destined to return again and again forever? Because in the next reflection, we will enter one of the most haunting ideas in all of philosophy, Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. Eternal recurrence. You sit alone in a quiet room. The clock ticks steadily. The light shifts across the walls. And somewhere, deep within you, a thought stirs, an unsettling, magnificent possibility. What if this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, is not fleeting? What if it will return again? Not once, not 100 times, but eternally. What if every joy, every sorrow, every trivial act and towering choice must be lived again and again, exactly as it happened, without change, without escape? This is Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, one of the most haunting and transformative ideas in philosophy. It is not merely a thought experiment. It is a test, a mirror held up to the soul. Nietzsche asked if a demon were to whisper in your ear, "This life, as you now live it, you must live once more and innumerable times more." Would you curse the demon, or would you bless it as divine? The eternal recurrence is not about cosmic cycles or metaphysical proofs. It is about the weight of life. It asks, do you live in such a way that you would welcome your life's endless repetition? Or do you live burdened by regret, fear, resentment, wishing to flee, to undo, to forget? If your choices, your loves, your failures, your moments of courage and cowardice were not fleeting, if they were the bricks of an eternal edifice, how would you live? Would you change? Would you dare more? Would you love harder, forgive sooner, create deeper? Eternal recurrence is an ethic hidden inside a metaphysics. It is a call to radical affirmation, to live as if every action mattered forever. Not for reward, not for heaven or fame, but because this life, this body, this brief, aching moment is all there is, and it is enough. Nietzsche does not offer comfort. He offers challenge. He offers a philosophy that demands courage without illusions, joy without guarantees, meaning without a final savior. The eternal recurrence asks not whether the universe is circular. It asks whether you can bear to live with such intensity, such wholeness, that you would not shrink from eternity. It is an invitation to dance with time, to embrace existence with all its terror and beauty as something so precious that repetition would be a blessing, not a curse. But if existence can repeat, if identity can stretch across infinite cycles, what happens when identity itself is unstable, when what we call self or object slowly changes, piece by piece, until we no longer know whether it is the same? Because in the next reflection, we will step into the ancient haunting mystery of the ship of Theseus, a thought experiment that asks whether anything or anyone can truly remain the same across the ceaseless flow of change. Ship of Theseus. Picture a ship anchored in a silent harbor. The wood creaks gently. The ropes sway. The salt air clings to every board, every mast, every sail. It is the ship of Theseus, ancient, storied, beloved. But time does what it always does. One plank rots and is replaced. Then another. Then a sail is mended. Then a mast is reforged. Years pass. Decades. Piece by piece, the ship is rebuilt, until not a single fragment of the original remains. And then the question rises, quiet but unshakable. Is this still the ship of Theseus? Or is it something else? A ghost, a memory, an echo wearing the skin of a ship. The paradox haunts not just the ship, but everything we love. Your body renews its cells over years. Your mind reshapes its memories, loses old fears, forms new dreams. You are not who you were 5 years ago. Not yesterday. Not a moment ago. Piece by piece, you have been rebuilt. Yet you remain you. Or do you? The ship of Theseus forces us to confront the instability of identity. Is identity a matter of material continuity, the same physical parts persisting through time? Or is it about structure, pattern, memory, the invisible threads that hold a thing together even as its parts change? Or is identity merely a story we tell, a fragile, necessary fiction to comfort ourselves against the chaos of change? The paradox cuts deep because it is not just about ships. It is about love that endures through hardship, friendship that survives transformation, commitments that must weather the eroding tides of time. It is about the aching, beautiful truth that everything you cherish, every person, every home, every self, is a river, not a stone. Always flowing, always becoming, never still, and yet, somehow, still there, still real. The ship of Theseus whispers that continuity is not about perfection, not about clinging to every old piece. It is about tending the form, the spirit, the intention, even as the material world falls away and renews itself. We are all ships sailing through seas of time, rebuilt by every storm, every sunrise. And still, Against all odds, we sail. Thank you for walking this long, winding path with me. If even one idea stayed with you, echoed in your thoughts, or shifted the way you see the world, then the journey was worth it. And if you'd like to keep wandering through questions like these, philosophies that challenge, unsettle, and quietly illuminate, you're always welcome here. Feel free to leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply subscribe so you don't miss the next trail. Until then, stay curious. And thank you truly for listening.